LoveLore Library. Chapter 112. The two took care of the flowers and plants for a while. Shang Junlin wasn't interested in these things at first, but Xinyu liked them, so he occasionally helped. After a few times, he had a certain understanding of these flowers and plants. In the beginning, he didn't know how to do anything. Shang Junlin had never taken care of flowers and plants in his life. When he was young, he was busy surviving in the harem. When he grew up, he entered the battlefield, so it was even more impossible for him to have time for this kind of romantic activity. When he ascended the throne, he took over the mess left by the previous emperor. In addition, the external enemies hadn't been eliminated yet, so the burden of the entire Dahuan was on his shoulders. Every day, he was busy with political affairs, which almost took up most of his time. Later, everything in Dahuan was on the right track. He had also passed the age of enjoying life. His life was as boring as ever, until Xinyu entered the palace. Like a stone thrown into the water, it created circles of ripples. Like a bright moon, it lit up his boring life. Shang Junlin had never thought that the two of them would enjoy such a leisurely day in the afternoon like now. Your Majesty's current technique is much better than before. Xinyu looked at the Junling that Shang Junlin was taking care of and joked, Your Majesty seems to like this Junling very much. Every time, you would take care of it alone. That was because he didn't want Xinyu to take care of the flowers and plants sent by others. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent so many flowers and plants to Yuzhang Palace to distract Xinyu. Yu cares about it, so Zhen naturally also cares more. Shang Junlin pursed his lips. Xinyu didn't expose his little thoughts. Does your Majesty still remember the first time you said you would help me loosen the soil for the flowers? You almost broke the roots. I took care of that pot of flowers for a few days before I managed to grow it back. It's this pot. Xinyu pointed at the pot of flowers beside his hand. I remember, Shang Junlin smiled as he recalled what happened at that time. At that time, Zhen was thinking that if this pot of water couldn't be saved, Zhen would find an opportunity to ask for it from you. Then, Zhen would find a pot of water that was exactly the same and say that it was saved. He still remembered the sadness that flashed across Xinyu's face at that moment. He didn't want to see such an expression on Xinyu's face, even if it was just a pot of flowers in his eyes. Since his Yu cared, he would find a way to make Yu not feel sad about this matter. So at that time, His Majesty had even thought of the worst-case scenario. Xinyu also smiled. His Majesty is a quick learner. Later on, he did not harm these flowers and plants. Shang Junlin was a person who would do everything to the extreme once he made up his mind. Xinyu had personally witnessed how Shang Junlin changed from a person who didn't know how to do anything. He also knew that Shang Junlin didn't like the flowers sent by Gu Tai. It was because he saw that Xinyu liked them that he didn't say anything. At most, he would send a large wave of flowers and plants to share the favor of Junling. It's also because Yu taught well. With such a diligent teacher like Yu, if the student still couldn't learn, then he could only be described as stupid. Shang Junlin finished loosening the soil and washed his hands in the basin beside him, drying them. The student has to be smart. Otherwise, no matter how good the teacher is, it's useless. Xinyu also finished tidying up the last pot of flowers. Shang Junlin grabbed Xinyu's hands, submerged them in the water, and washed them little by little. Then is Yu willing to teach Xin some other knowledge? For example, how can the student please the teacher to make the teacher more comfortable? Be willing to do more with the student. Your Majesty really doesn't forget about this matter at all times. Seeing that Shang Junlin's words were getting more and more out of hand, Xinyu interrupted him. Xinyu's hand was imprisoned in the man's palm. The man's calloused fingertips slid over the back of her hand, causing her to feel a burst of numbness. Xinyu couldn't help but curl her fingers. Her soft palm was opened, and the man's bony hand forcefully submerged into her hand. From the palm of her hand to the gap between her fingers, the man's 10 fingers were tightly intertwined. Jin wants to kiss you. Shang Junlin stared at him with burning eyes. If your majesty wants to kiss me, then kiss me. The rest of her words were blocked by the man who suddenly approached her. Nibbling, licking, and sucking. The man's actions were as bold as always, forcefully cooperating with Xinyu. She closed her eyes, and her long eyelashes cast a shadow under her eyes. Her eyelashes fluttered gently with her breathing, like a startled butterfly. After the kiss ended, Shang Junlin's forehead pressed against Xinyu's. Both of their breaths were somewhat unstable. How was your student's performance this time? Shang Junlin chuckled. The man's voice was low and slightly trembling, knocking on Xinyu's heart. Xinyu's reaction was even more intense than before. Seeing this, Shang Junlin's eyes darkened even more. He sucked on Xinyu's lips and asked, "Do you like your student acting like this?" Your Majesty, Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Shang Junlin had already kissed him again. Xin will build a greenhouse for you. He hit Xinyu and his favorite flowers together. Xinyu was immersed in a haze, and all of his senses were robbed. Vaguely, he seemed to hear Shang Junlin saying something, but the voice was separated by a vast white fog, so he couldn't hear it clearly. He could only reply with meaningless syllables. Shang Junlin hugged him even tighter. 2 days later, the imperial court issued the first government order to aid Subei. The people of the capital had been waiting for this moment for many days, and finally, they arranged their belongings to see what they could donate. Of course, Xinyu knew that the premise of donating was that it couldn't affect the normal lives of the people, and it also had to prevent officials from taking advantage of the opportunity to fill their pockets. After discussing with Shang Junlin, he decided to anonymously disclose the donation information. The people would be informed of the ins and outs of each donation. If the donation exceeded a certain amount, an official would visit the person, and after obtaining the consent of the owner, the donor's information would be disclosed to the public. The latter was specially set up for merchants and some aristocratic families. They could choose to use this opportunity to gain a good reputation for themselves, or they could choose to donate silently. The imperial court would give the same reward to both parties. It was undeniable that this was a huge and tedious project. Fortunately, Shang Junlin had selected many useful officials through the imperial examinations over the years. These people didn't have high official positions, and there weren't many of them in the imperial court. Most of them were still in the process of being transferred out, so they were just in time to handle this matter. The government order was quickly sent to various places, and the imperial court set up a special monitoring organization. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Revenue were temporarily in charge, and the officials who entered this organization were mostly from the capital. They were in groups of 2 or 3, and they would take people to various places in the Great Han Dynasty as quickly as possible to supervise the matters related to the donation. At the same time, the imperial court also arranged for special officials to explain the specific process of donating to the people. Because of the disaster in Subei, the entire Great Han Dynasty started to move. All the officials were nervous and expectant about this operation. They couldn't find similar precedents in the history books. If they succeeded, it would be a great achievement in the history books, but if not, Yan Zheng and the other merchants who first received the news were the first to act. They had already prepared supplies in advance, mostly food and other necessities. There was also a lot of gold and silver, which were donated under the witness of the officials sent by the imperial court. Next were the aristocratic families. After a few generations of accumulation, the wealth in their hands was immeasurable. The ordinary people were informed in advance, and they contributed as much as they could. Xinyu considered the possible problems and incorporated the solutions into the script. Those who had watched the story of returning to spring would at least have a certain understanding of donating. In addition, there were officials watching from the side, which greatly reduced the possibility of problems arising. The local officials cooperated with the people sent by the imperial court, and the donating process was carried out in an orderly manner. The hidden dragon guards were scattered all over the country, and they passed the news back to the capital. Subei. Official Fong and the others rested for a while, and they sent people to start the disaster relief. The food and other supplies they brought were temporarily enough, and Official Fong also received confirmation from the capital that more supplies would be sent over, so he didn't have to worry. After receiving the news, Official Fong also dared to do the disaster relief. First, they helped the people. Official Fong ordered people to give out porridge every day, and those who were able to work gathered together to do what they could. In the face of a disaster, the most important thing was not just disaster relief, but also the problem of post-disaster reconstruction. Subei's geographical location was too important, and it would be a major blow to Dahuan if it couldn't recover after the disaster. Official Fong took out a portion of the food and gave it to the Subei army. After all, before the imperial court people came, the people in Subei relied on the Subei army's salary to survive. Subei was very big, and Official Fong ignored the advice of the officials, and began to lead the people sent by the imperial court to help with the disaster relief. After leaving the biggest city in Subei, Official Fong and the others finally realized how serious the disaster was. There were people starving to death by the roadside at any time, and there was no harvest. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was hell on earth. It's already so serious, why are those people still saying that it's okay? Was this not a big deal? Will they only admit that the disaster is serious when all the people are dead? The younger officials saw this scene, and their eyes turned red. What was written in books or heard from other people was not as shocking as seeing it with their own eyes. They lived in the city and were almost deceived by the tranquility of the city. If Master Fong did not insist on bringing them out, would they not know what they had done wrong until they returned to the capital? A shabbily dressed teenager saw them, and his eyes lit up. He crawled over on all fours. "Masters, please do me a favor and give me something to eat." The soft-hearted official subconsciously reached for the food, but was stopped by Official Fong. "Stop." Official Fong walked over and looked at the crowd of victims. He frowned and squatted down, ignoring the confusion of the official. "Can you still walk? If you can, follow me. Do you see over there? Our people are giving out porridge over there. If you stick to it, you'll get food. Not only will you be full today, you'll be full in the future." There was a small city in front of them, and it was also the destination of Official Fong's group. It was not far from here, and under normal circumstances, they could reach it in less than an hour. The teenager looked into the distance, and then looked at Official Fong, who was squatting down to look at him at the same level. His eyes were half puzzled and half conflicted. Official Fong nodded. "I'm not lying to you. Our people are already there. Look, isn't there smoke over there?" The teenager looked over again, and in a daze, he really did see smoke rising from the chimneys. "You look like a good person. I'll believe you this time." The teenager's face was covered in dirt, but his eyes were no longer lifeless. Instead, there was light in them. It was the look of someone who saw hope after despair. Official Fong suppressed the bitterness in his heart. "You have to follow. If you follow, you'll survive." The teenager nodded. Official Fong stood up, picked up a branch from the side, and handed it to the teenager. "This is for you." The teenager slowly stood up with the support of the branch. He looked at the backs of Official Fong's group, and slowly but firmly followed step by step. Chapter 113. "Sir, why didn't you let me give the child something to eat?" The official couldn't help but turn around. Don't look back, Lord Fong's voice was still steady. You can save him now, but you can't save him forever. What's more, didn't you see those refugees faintly gathering around us? If you save this one, what about the rest? There aren't many people, that's because you've only seen these people. Do you know why I told them to take the food and leave at night? It's because starving people don't have any rationality. They even eat people. Do you think you can leave this place safely if you take out the food? Lord Fong's unhurried voice caused the official to break out in a cold sweat. Another official walked up and whispered, I know you're soft-hearted, but being soft-hearted when you shouldn't be will only harm everyone. This official knows his mistake. The young official lowered his head in shame. In fact, before they left, Lord Fong had told them to ignore people begging for food on the road. He saw that the child was young and thought of his younger brother. He couldn't bear it and almost made a big mistake. Lord Fong sighed. He didn't have the heart to do that, but the goal of this trip was the entire Subei. He couldn't lose the big picture for the small. He knew that this trip would be difficult before he left, but His Majesty sent him because he trusted him. No matter what, he couldn't betray this trust. The small town in front of them was their second destination. Compared to the main city, the environment here was worse. But in the face of all this, none of the officials complained. They knew that just surviving was already the result of the people living here putting in the greatest effort. The official who came to greet them wasn't very dignified. His cheeks were thin and his complexion wasn't good. When he saw them, his eyes lit up. You must be the disaster relief official sent by the imperial court. I didn't expect you to come in person. Please come in, there aren't many things in the residence. Please forgive me. The official residence of this small town was much smaller than the main city. The decorations were also very old. Lord Fong looked around but couldn't find a single valuable item. After a few simple greetings, Lord Fong went straight to the point. How is the disaster situation here? I had people bring some supplies, but I don't know if it's enough. The official clearly knew the situation here and gave a concise summary of the disaster situation. Lord Fong's frown deepened as he listened. Strictly speaking, the disaster began at the end of April. Until now, there had not been a single drop of rain. Later, when they could no longer hold on, the government sold everything that could be sold for money and bought a batch of food from outside. Only then were they barely able to hold on until now. Didn't you say that the northern Jiangsu army's pay and provisions were used for emergency purposes? Most of the food is in the main city. For small towns and villages like ours, it's already a blessing to be able to get some. There's only so much food left, and it won't last long with so many people. Those who can leave have already left, but where can they escape to? It's the same situation in the entire Subei region. Didn't anyone escape to the northern part of Su? The minor official looked embarrassed. He gritted his teeth and continued, it's impossible to escape outside. This official has a relative who wanted to leave Subei with his wife and daughter, but they disappeared before they could go far. They haven't been found yet. No wonder the imperial court didn't receive any news. Lord Fong pondered. It turned out that from the beginning, someone had deliberately prevented the people here from escaping. As long as there were disaster victims outside, they would be able to find out that something had happened in Subei. After understanding the situation, Lord Fong asked the minor official to gather people to distribute porridge outside the official residence. Lord, there are many refugees outside the city gate. A gatekeeper came to report. They should have followed us here. Lord Fong remembered that it was a young man he had met on the way here. Should we let them into the city? The county magistrate looked at the busy crowd. Actually, it doesn't matter if they come in. There aren't many people in the city anyway. Some of these people might have originally come from the city. Let's check first. After making sure there's no problem, bring them here. You guys go and help. Lord Fong pointed at a few guards behind him. With the guards maintaining order, the people who came to get the porridge lined up in an orderly manner. The county magistrate's words were not wrong. There weren't many people left here. The people distributing the porridge moved quickly. Before long, the long line could be seen. Are these the only people? Lord Fong frowned as he looked at the people squatting at the side. Even though the city was not big, the number of people here was much less than he had expected. Lord, I have a bedridden mother at home. I wonder if you can give a bowl of porridge to my bedridden mother. What are you thinking? Lord Fong is already kind enough to give porridge. The person beside him pulled him aside. He had heard that the imperial court had sent an official to provide disaster relief. The philanthropist official had even personally come to this small town to distribute porridge. Those who could come had all come. There were still some who couldn't, especially the childless elderly, who could only resign themselves to fate. You, come here. Lord Fong called the official who had almost made a mistake on the way here. Who is more familiar with this place? Bring him around and send some food to the bedridden elderly. You are really a philanthropist. The people who were eating porridge at the side heard this and couldn't help but put down the porridge and kowtow. Since the imperial court has sent me here, I will save those who can be saved. Also, gather all the doctors here. I need some medicinal herbs. After major disasters such as droughts and floods, they were often accompanied by plagues. Before he came, the imperial physicians of the imperial hospital had given him some prescriptions to prevent plagues. He had to nip the problem in the bud. That's right, let the doctors come with us to check on the situation of these people. If they have symptoms such as fever, they need to be treated together. Also, let everyone in the city clean themselves. Lord Fong gave out orders one by one. The people below followed and quickly acted. Knowing that the imperial court had sent enough food and wouldn't abandon them, the people also enthusiastically helped. Originally, he was going to arrange things for them to do. Before he came, Xinyu had specially told him that if possible, he should try his best to let the disaster victims use their own labor to exchange for food. Only in this way could the possibility of a riot be reduced. The disaster victims who came with Lord Fong and his group were also properly settled. After that, the youth found Lord Fong and kowtowed to him. Lord Fong saved my life. I am willing to do anything for Lord Fong. That's not necessary. You were able to come here by yourself. Lord Fong patted the shoulder of the youth who had been cleaned. What are your plans for the future? I also want to be an official. I want to be a good official like Lord Fong. The youth's eyes were firm. Lord Fong's heart moved. What about your family? Do you want to go find them? I don't have a family. The light in the youth's eyes dimmed. I don't know where they are. Can you read? Lord Fong asked. The youth nodded. I can. I used to write letters for some people. Then are you willing to work for me? Lord Fong asked again. Can I? The youth was pleasantly surprised. As long as you want. However, it will be very tiring to work for me. I am willing. The youth nodded heavily. At night, Lord Fong wrote down the situation in Subei as usual and handed it to the black-clothed people hiding nearby. A few days later, Shang Junlin received a report from Subei. The situation in Subei is really strange. When Fong Jun arrived outside the main city, he found that the situation there was completely different from the main city. Shang Junlin picked up the report written by Lord Fong and showed it to Xinyu. So the soldiers' provisions are all in the hands of the main city's officials. Only a small part of it is actually used by the people. How deeply did the late emperor's people infiltrate Subei? Xinyu frowned. He knew too little about Subei. In his previous life, Subei had never been in any trouble. His attention was focused on the south. Until his death, Subei's existence was not high. When I led the Subei army to resist the northern desert, I was most seriously injured in Subei. At that time, the officials in Subei did not act, causing half of Subei's territory to be occupied by the northern desert. After I led the army to take back the territory, I fiercely attacked and separated the military and government in Subei. Now it seems that my purge was not thorough enough. Shang Junlin looked displeased. Xinyu, those people actually let Lord Fong go elsewhere. Shang Junlin, Fong Jun can directly contact the Subei army. For the time being, they did not dare to go too far. Xinyu, according to the information we know, those people should not be able to control the Subei army. Seeing that they only dared to kill people after they left Subei's territory, we know that they are afraid of the Subei army. As long as the Subei army was not infiltrated, there was nothing to be afraid of. Shang Junlin, Gu Huai's side has also contacted the Subei army. They will first investigate internally to find the problematic people. Once they have dealt with the people planted in the Subei army and figured out their true purpose, they will take action to deal with them. Xinyu, Your Majesty, did you find anything in King Yu's fief? I found clues about him secretly recruiting soldiers and buying horses. Shang Junlin was even more displeased at the mention of King Yu. He stroked Xinyu's hair. Do you know why he approached you in the first place? When Shang Junlin suddenly mentioned this, Xinyu was stunned. Rope in Jinbei Marquis' residence. What's there to rope in Jinbei Marquis' residence? Do you know what news I heard from Shang Junyue's fief? Shang Junyue raised a group of strategists, and the people in the group came from different places. One of the strategists who was good at divination once mentioned to Shang Junyue a maxim: whoever gets the son of Jinbei Marquis will get the world. As long as he thought about how King Yu had coveted Xinyu from the beginning, Shang Junlin could not suppress the murderous intent in his heart. Xinyu's mind suddenly shook. He seemed to have thought of something, but also seemed to have not thought of anything. There was a trace of confusion in his eyes, so that's why he approached Shin Qingran while approaching me. How many secrets were hidden in the past life that was hidden under the timeline? It's just nonsense. Only people like King Yu would believe it. Don't think too much. I have already asked the hidden dragon guards to find a way to find that person. No matter why that person said those words, I will make him pay the price. Yu was deceived because of a sentence that he did not know was true or false. This time, Yu was smart and did not fall for it. What if he was really deceived by King Yu? Shang Junlin did not dare to imagine that possibility. I won't think too much. What King Yu thinks has nothing to do with me. I know that Your Majesty will protect me. Isn't that right, Your Majesty? Xinyu leaned on Shang Junlin's shoulder. At this moment, he was even more confused about what happened in his previous life. Chapter 114. Xinyu was never afraid of fate. In his previous life, he was able to overcome the difficult situation. Regardless of whether his fate was intentional or not, he did not care. He always believed that he had to walk his own path. I will protect you. No one can hurt you. Shang Junlin hugged Xinyu tightly. Does Your Majesty believe what that person said? Does Your Majesty believe in fate? Xinyu leaned into the man's arms and asked softly. Fate? Shang Junlin snorted. I have never believed in such things. When I was young, everyone told me to accept my fate and become an abandoned prince. But I did not. I have never believed in the so-called fate. If you want something, don't fight for it yourself and blindly rely on fate, you might as well give it up from the beginning. Xinyu gave a muffled laugh and said, Your Majesty is right. I have never believed in fate. When I was young, the servant girls and manservants in the Fu told me more than once that I didn't have this fate and that I had taken the title of D's son for nothing. At that time, I thought, so what? No matter how much Shen Qingran and Yin Yang Ru think, the fact that the D's son is mine will not change. I must take this title. Not only that, I will stand at a height that they can't reach in the future and look down on them. The facts prove that Shen Yu did it. Whether in his previous life or this life, he stood at a position higher than Shen Qingran and his son. In his previous life, Shen Qingran was favored by Emperor Yu. When he met Shen Yu, he could only obediently shrink back. Shen Yu never wronged himself. In his previous life, he did not like Shen Qingran, so he did not force himself to be on good terms with him. Emperor Yu tried to repair their relationship several times, but he was rejected. Will your majesty think that I am not good? How can that be? Whatever a Yu does is right. Shang Junlin rubbed his cheek. Your majesty, if you catch that person, I want to see him. Maybe the reason why King Yu came to him in his 2 lives was because of this person. Shen Yu was somewhat concerned about this person. Shang Junlin, who originally wanted to catch the man and execute him on the spot, paused. In his heart, he did not want Shen Yu to come into contact with that man. Why would you want to see him? He's just a conman. Since he accurately said the name, son of Count North, perhaps he used to be active in the capital, or even went to Count North's residence. I'm curious about this person's identity. If he was a scammer, he could just let Shang Junlin deal with him. If he wasn't, that person might be able to solve some of his doubts. Alright, but when you go see him, you have to bring me along. Speaking of Shen Qingran, after Shang Junlin went to the imperial court the next morning, Shen Yu asked Mu Shi about the situation in Count North's mansion. His people had been keeping an eye on Count North's mansion, and any movement would be directly transmitted to Mu Shi. Shen Qingran has been very quiet recently. It seems that he has stopped making trouble. Concubine Ru has also been very quiet. Shen Yu was somewhat surprised by this result. It was reasonable to say that Shen Qingran and concubine Ru did not seem like people who would obediently accept their fate. Otherwise, they would not have caused so much trouble in Count North's mansion. Shen Yu was right. How could Shen Qingran be willing to accept his current fate? He thought that he was from the modern era, so there was no reason that he could not beat some ancient people. How could he be willing to watch Shen Yu live better and better? When the summer was hot, he made a fuss and said that he wanted to see Count North, saying that he had something very important to give him. However, Count North did not want to see him at all. He had no choice but to use his trump card, saying that he could turn water into ice in the summer. As soon as he said this, before he could report it to Count North, the servant who delivered the message laughed. I say, second young master, you should save it. Now the imperial court sells ice at a low price. There is already a way to make ice. Don't you just find an excuse to trick Count North to come over? How is that possible? Shen Qingran did not believe it. He clearly remembered that De Huan did not have a way to make ice. He hid this method because he wanted to have a better future for himself in the future. He did not tell anyone. He grabbed the servant's shoulder and said with a ferocious face, "You lied to me, didn't you? Did you get benefits from Shen Yu and deliberately don't let me see my father?" Second young master, the servant pulled his hand away with a cold face. I called you, second young master, but you really think that you are the same as before. Why would I lie to you? You can casually ask and you will know whether I lied to you or not. If the imperial court did not sell ice at a low price, do you think that with your current situation, you can still use ice? Shen Qingran's face was blank for a moment. He had never thought about this problem. Since he transmigrated, he was favored because of his concubine mother. Everything he used was not inferior to Shen Yu, the son of the first wife. During this time, he had been thinking about how to change his current situation and how to climb to the top of Shin Yu's head again. He did not pay attention to the changes in his surroundings. Not only you, even the little ones can use ice. Who wouldn't be happy to spend some money and have a good sleep? The summer in the capital was really hot. In the past, when they had no money, they served their master during the day and could get some cool air. At night, there was no other way. It was so hot that they could not sleep. Let's talk about the matter of being instructed by the eldest young master. The eldest young master is now living in the palace. How could he instruct the people in the palace through the palace walls? Besides, Her Majesty will soon go to the summer palace to avoid the summer heat. As the only person in Her Majesty's harem, the eldest young master will naturally be busy preparing for the summer heat. How could he have the time to care about your business? The servant's words made Shin Qingran's face turn green and white. Especially the servant's words revealed that Shin Yu was living well now, which made him feel like he was sitting on pins and needles. The manservant was bullied here and didn't want to let Shin Qingran have a good time. When he went to reply to Sir Jinbei, he only said that Shin Qingran had a bad attitude and didn't mention anything about the ice making. Going to the summer palace to avoid the summer heat. Shin Qingran remembered that Count North had taken him there when he was young. This time, Count North would definitely be able to go there, so this was his only chance. He wanted to tell the emperor in person that he was the one who should go to the palace. It was Shin Yu who took his position. He wanted to take this opportunity to put everything back to its original position. Unexpectedly, he waited and waited, but Count North did not take him to the summer palace. Instead, he took another concubine in the palace. Shin Qingran was so angry that he smashed his favorite ornament. After Mu Shi finished talking about this, she covered her mouth and smiled. Count North scolded him again after he went back. Since then, Shin Qingran has been quiet in Count North's palace. Count North is probably completely disappointed in his son. Shin Yu played with the empty teacup on the table. That's right. Young master, you don't know. After Duke Jinbei returned from the summer palace, Shin Qingran made a big fuss. He even went to ask Duke Jinbei why he didn't take him there. Did he not take his son seriously? Concubine Ru finally made Duke Jinbei feel a little guilty by being gentle. He was almost angered to death. Speaking of this, Mu Shi's eyes flashed with a touch of joy. When they were in Count North's palace, how arrogant were Shin Qingran and concubine Ru. How many bad things did they do to her young master because of Count North's favor? Now, they finally got what they deserved. Shin Yu just thought of it and suddenly asked. After knowing the situation of the two, he no longer cared about this matter. He looked at the place where the flowers and plants were placed and raised his eyebrows. Did His Majesty send flowers again? Among the flowers and plants, there was one with a huge yellow flower bud. Shin Yu walked over to take a look, but he couldn't recognize the species. When was this pot sent here? Shin Yu looked at the flower and asked. It seems to be 2 days ago. Mu Shi's eyes flashed with confusion for a moment. I don't have much impression of it. I'll ask someone to ask. Mu Shi called the attendant in charge of taking care of the flowers and plants. The attendant saw the flower, thought for a moment, and replied, this flower was sent by Princeton heard that you like flowers and plants, so he specially found a precious one and sent it here. Princeton? Why would Princeton send flowers for no reason? Take the flowers away. In the future, only flowers sent by His Majesty will be placed here. Find a place to put the flowers sent by others. Shin Yu ordered lightly. Yes. The attendant hurried forward and moved the flowers away. Shin Yu looked around and didn't find any strange flowers and plants. I didn't do a good job and didn't carefully ask about this matter. Mu Shi bowed her head and admitted her mistake. Just be careful in the future. Tell the servants to pay more attention. Don't casually accept flowers and plants of unknown origin. There were too many people who could tamper with flowers and plants. Yes. Find someone to find out what kind of flower that pot is and find out the origin of the flower by the way. Yes. Young master, there's one more thing. Many people in the palace asked me if they could donate some money. Although it's not much, it's still a token of their sincerity. On the way back, Mushi asked. At that time, didn't you let many people in the palace watch Return to Spring? They've come to me several times, saying that they hope they can do something. At that time, after Return to Spring was rehearsed, in order to test the effect, Shen Yu let them perform it several times in the palace. Shang Junlin didn't have any concubines in the harem, so Shen Yu let the palace people listen to it. These people's reactions could also explain some people's reactions after watching it. It's okay to do a token of their sincerity, but tell them not to compare and just do their best. I'll leave this matter to you and little eunuch Mang. Shen Yu also heard this news in Consort Dowager's palace. He couldn't help but be stunned. At the same time, he admired Shen Yu even more. The donations outside the palace were managed by the imperial court. Shen Yu in the palace couldn't completely ignore it. However, with Mu Shi and little eunuch Meng in charge, Shen Yu didn't have to worry too much. Shang Junlin returned from the imperial court and heard eunuch Meng mention this matter on the way back. In my opinion, Guijuan's method is really wonderful. Right now, almost everyone is paying attention to the matters in Subei. Whatever those rascals want to do, they definitely won't succeed. Shang Junlin felt proud. You can always solve problems for Jin. When they arrived at Yuzhang Palace, Shen Yu was looking at the account book. It was the donation of the palace people after Mu Shi sorted it out and submitted it. What is you looking at? Shang Junlin waved his hand to signal the palace people to retreat and walked to Shen Yu's side. Looking at the account book of the palace people's donation, it's more than I expected. Shen Yu handed one of the account books to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin took it and said, the imperial court also sorted out a copy. It's much more than expected. In order to reduce the time spent on the road, Shen had them directly transported from the original place to Subei. It's just to find something for the garrison troops to do. What's the reaction of the vassal kings? Perhaps they were scared in the capital during the new year. After the imperial court people went there, they did whatever they were told to do. They were also very concerned about the donation. Did you receive anything from the vassal kings? Shang Junlin didn't forget that before the vassal kings left the capital, they were ruthlessly ripped off by his EU. Chapter 115. The people they left in the capital sent me some things. I asked my subordinates to exchange them for food and medicinal herbs to donate. Shen Yu thought of something important. Your Majesty, you must let them prepare for the plague in advance. After a disaster, there would be a plague. The former was a natural disaster and couldn't be resisted. The latter could be minimized through manpower. I have already instructed them. This time, I will send the imperial physicians who are experienced in this field. I have also recruited physicians who are experienced in this field. They will go to Subei with the next batch of relief supplies. Through this incident, Shang Junlin realized that a lot of things could be done by using the power of the people. In the past, they were too narrow-minded and ignored the huge power that could be used by the people. If it wasn't for Shen Yu mentioning it, he was afraid that the disaster relief this time wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Your Majesty, is there any new progress regarding Fei Meng? After this drought, if there was an epidemic, would it be related to Fei Meng? Shang Junlin shook his head. The hidden dragon guards are investigating, but there are very few clues. Every time, they will be cut off at the most crucial point. I am afraid of alerting the enemy, so I didn't let them make too big of a move. Your Majesty, which imperial physician are you sending to Subei this time? Is he reliable? Shin Yu asked. It's Imperial Physician Wu and one of his students. They will also bring along a few less experienced ones. Imperial Physician Gu also wanted to go, but I didn't allow it. In Shang Junlin's heart, Subei was important, but Shin Yu's health was another matter. Imperial Physician Gu was responsible for Shin Yu's health. He wouldn't let Imperial Physician Gu leave so easily. There are no problems with these people. Yu, what do you think? Shang Junlin didn't think that Shin Yu would ask about this for no reason. There are some things I want to say about Fei Meng. In the end, after Shin Yu and Shang Junlin discussed, they decided to reveal some important information to Imperial Physician Wu. Imperial Physician Wu's medical skills were excellent, and he had studied all kinds of epidemics. If it really involved Fei Meng, Imperial Physician Wu would be able to distinguish it in time. Imperial Physician Courtyard. Imperial Dr. Wu called his student and Imperial Dr. Gu over. I've already spoken to His Majesty. You don't have to worry too much. There are many doctors going to Subei. There won't be any problems. Imperial Physician Wu comforted his disciples. He knew that his students were worried about him, but there were some things that if everyone did not do out of fear of possible risks, it would only lead to more serious consequences. Moreover, he had come into contact with various epidemics in the past, so it was not as scary as the rumors said. It was just that the infection rate was slightly higher. If the cause of the disease was found and the right medicine was used, the disease could still be cured. As a doctor, he should treat all illnesses equally. If he gave up because of fear, he might as well quit being a doctor. We know that we can't persuade teacher, and we won't. We only hope that teacher can take good care of himself. Third senior brother, when you go with teacher, you must remind teacher to eat on time, rest on time, and not be overworked. In truth, it wasn't that they didn't want their teacher to go, but they couldn't help but worry. After all, their teacher was getting on in years. Going to the faraway Subei, where the environment was harsh, what if something happened? Brothers, don't worry. I will. The third disciple stood up and cupped his hands to everyone. Actually, I originally wanted to bring little Gu along. This is a very good opportunity for him to gain experience. Unfortunately, His Majesty won't allow it. Imperial Physician Wu knew that Imperial Physician Gu's qualifications were still lacking if he wanted to take over his position. If he could go with him to Subei, he could earn some merits. Imperial Physician Gu also wanted to go. On one hand, he studied because of his family background, and on the other hand, he wanted to save the people of the world. He had expressed his thoughts to His Majesty in private, but His Majesty clearly hoped that he could stay in the capital and look after His Majesty's health. Imperial Physician Wu gave a few more instructions to his students. He was determined to go to Subei. How could he not know that he was getting on in years? But with his medical skills, he still had to put them to good use. You all should also relax. This time, there hasn't been an epidemic in Subei yet. We're going to do more to prevent it, so it's not that dangerous. Instead of worrying here, why don't you use what you've learned to make some medicine? I'll bring it with me when the time comes. Imperial Physician Wu didn't want his students to be stuck in a state of worry, so he suggested. Based on his experience, Imperial Physician Wu listed some necessary items and entered the palace to make a final report. At that time, Shang Junlin was with Shin Yu, so he asked Imperial Physician Wu to come directly to Yuzhang Palace. This was the first time Imperial Physician Wu saw Shin Yu at such a close distance. He once thought that Shin Yu was a sickly beauty, but when he saw him, he discovered that he wasn't. If he didn't know that Shin Yu had congenital deficiency in advance, Imperial Physician Wu would have thought that he was a normal person just by looking at his current appearance. His complexion was very good, his eyes were bright, and there wasn't a trace of illness on his body. Sitting together with His Majesty, his aura wasn't suppressed at all. The atmosphere between the two complemented each other and couldn't tolerate anyone else. No wonder His Majesty didn't want Gu Chong to go to Su Bei. At this moment, Imperial Physician Wu understood. Because in His Majesty's heart, Guizhuan's status was not lower than anything else. It was even faintly higher than anything else. There could be many doctors going to Su Bei. One more Imperial Physician Gu wouldn't make a difference. However, the only one who could make His Majesty feel assured to nurse Guizhuan's body was Imperial Physician Gu. Imperial Physician Gu was indeed the most talented doctor he had ever seen. If it weren't for Shikai, he wouldn't have made an exception to let Imperial Physician Gu enter the Imperial Hospital. Now, he wouldn't have made an exception and wanted to pass his position to him. According to the pulse recorded by the Imperial Hospital, Guizhuan's physical condition was really not good. Even if Imperial Physician Wu were to nurse Guizhuan's body, it probably wouldn't have the effect it had now. Imperial Physician Wu, please sit down. Don't be restrained. Shinyu asked the palace servants to bring a chair for Imperial Physician Wu. He and Shang Junlin were originally playing chess in the courtyard. When they heard that Imperial Physician Wu had come, they directly met him in the courtyard. Since it wasn't a formal occasion, there was no need to be too restrained. After Imperial Physician Wu sat down, he talked about the preparations of the Imperial Hospital and some handover matters. This official will temporarily hand over the Imperial Hospital to Gu Chong. Your Majesty, please rest assured. This official has arranged everything. After this official leaves, the Imperial Hospital will operate as usual. There won't be any trouble. I know. If there's anything you need, just tell me. This time, you're going to Su Bei to do things for me. I won't treat you unfairly. Shang Junlin said. Your Majesty is too serious. Even if your Majesty didn't give the order, this official would have wanted to go there personally. This official sat in this position because of the merit of curing the epidemic. These years, there hasn't been any new epidemic under your Majesty's rule, so there's no place for this official to use his skills. Your Majesty, please rest assured. With this official here, this official will not let any problems occur in Su Bei. No one except Imperial Physician Wu dared to make such a promise. With you here, I'm very relieved. During this trip, Imperial Physician Wu must also take good care of your body. Shang Junlin still had a lot of trust in Imperial Physician Wu's medical skills. Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. As a subject, what he hoped most was to be appreciated by the Emperor. Imperial Physician Wu felt that everything was worth it to hear Shang Junlin's words today. There's one more thing. The medical alcohol that I gave you before can not only reduce wound infection, but also be used to disinfect. Another thing is, if there really is an epidemic, I hope that Imperial Physician Wu can carefully observe and see if there are any differences or similarities between this epidemic and the ones you've seen before. I've listed some things here. If the situation matches up, I hope that Imperial Physician Wu can report the news to Lord Fong as soon as possible. Shin Yu waved his hand. Mu Shi, bring the things here. Mu Shi presented a sealed letter and handed it to Imperial Physician Wu. Imperial Physician Wu, just read the things inside and remember them by yourself. Shang Junlin said. This official obeys. Why did you write those things to Imperial Physician Wu? After Imperial Physician Wu left, Shang Junlin asked, previously, you asked about Fei Meng. Is it because he suspects that the epidemic in Su Bei is related to Fei Meng? It had to be said that Shang Junlin was a very sensitive person. He could easily grasp the most crucial information from a person's movements and then integrate it to reach a conclusion that was infinitely close to the truth. You can say that. Shin Yu didn't hide anything from Shang Junlin now. But it's just my personal guess. Whether it's true or not depends on Imperial physician Wu's verification. In the letter, Shinyu wrote about the phenomenon of the man-made epidemic and the symptoms of some people who were infected. He also wrote some countermeasures according to the memory of his previous life. The man-made epidemic that he knew of didn't happen in the present, so he wasn't sure if the other party would take action. You, don't worry. We've made sufficient preparations this time. Nothing will happen. Shang Junlin held Shinyu's hand and comforted him. After the first batch of relief materials was organized, they were transported to Subei from all over the country. Shang Junlin gave a strict order that every donation of money and materials must be made public. When the materials arrived in Subei, how to use them would be transmitted to each place so that the people could participate in the whole process. Shinyu and Shang Junlin had previously proposed to build a separate communication channel for each place. This was the first time that the latest information about the disaster relief would be sent to each place at the fastest speed through this channel. Unlike the court bulletin, this newspaper was for everyone in Dahuan. Taking into account that there were people who were illiterate, special readers were arranged. At first, the imperial court didn't agree to do this. Some officials felt that it was improper to tell the people everything. Shang Junlin didn't bother to pay attention to them and directly gave the order. Once the imperial edict was issued, not many people dared to disobey it. Only the prime minister suffered because there was one more thing he had to take responsibility for. After this incident, I plan to send He Qingyu and the others to Subei. At night, Shang Junlin said while reading through the memorials. Being transferred outside had always been the fastest way to increase one's qualifications. If one could make some achievements, they could be transferred back to the capital ahead of time and enter the center of power in Dahuan. Every official who passed the imperial examination had to go through this. According to the normal process, He Qingyu and the others needed to work in Hanlin Academy for 2 to 3 years, then be transferred outside, and then be transferred back to the capital step by step. Now, they had only worked in Hanlin Academy for less than half a year, and Shang Junlin wanted to send them to Subei. In fact, it was against the ancestral rules. However, in Shang Junlin's place, the ancestral rules were meant to be broken. Why does Your Majesty suddenly want them to go to Subei? When the disaster relief is over, I don't plan to keep any of these officials in Subei. If they still wanted to hide such a big incident, they shouldn't stay in that position. You, come over here and let me hug you. As soon as Shinyu approached, the man pulled her into his arms. Shang Junlin buried his head in Shinyu's neck and took a deep breath. Hug you and these things won't be so troublesome. Chapter 116. I'm not a panacea, how can I have such an effect? Shinyu found a comfortable position in Shang Junlin's arms. You is more effective than any panacea for Jin. Shang Junlin buried his head in Shinyu's neck, his voice slightly muffled. Then give His Majesty a hug. Shinyu patted the man's head, so that His Majesty can deal with government affairs more energetically. Shang Junlin tightened his arms around the person in his arms. Were the officials in Subei sent by His Majesty later? Shinyu looked at the booklet spread on the table. It was sent back by Fong Darren from Subei, and there were other officials beside him. Fong Darren brought officials from Jing City. Every time they arrived at a new place, they would be shocked speechless by the tragic situation there. They originally thought that the first small city they passed was already very bad, but the further north they went, the more they found that it was just the tip of the iceberg. The more they saw, the more shocking it became. Every time they arrived at a place, they would gather the people together after giving them porridge and do something that they could. When they recovered some of their strength, they would exchange it for more food according to how much they worked. They also had them help and relieve the local people who were unable to move. In the booklet written by Fong Darren, he described in detail the current situation of every place they passed. Just the written description was enough to make people feel despair. Some were directly promoted from the local area. Shang Junlin rubbed Shen Yu's fingers. Shen almost completely changed the upper-level officials in Subei. The imperial court didn't have many people that could be used, so they only sent some people over. Most of them were promoted from the local area. That year when Subei was lost, if Shang Junlin didn't lead troops to arrive in time and fight back the Northern Desert Army, it was hard to say if Dahuan would still be Dahuan today. Shang Junlin didn't want to listen to their excuses, so he directly chopped them down to comfort the souls of the soldiers who had died because of their dereliction of duty, and also to avenge the innocent people who had died. On the day of the execution, the entire city watched, and all of them applauded and cheered. Amidst the smell of blood, Shang Junlin had all the officials in Subei watch the execution with their own eyes. Some of the officials had lived like princes for many years and had never seen such a scene before. Their faces were pale and they did not dare to watch. However, each of them was guarded by 2 burly soldiers. As long as they tried to dodge, they would be stopped. Shang Junlin was also using this opportunity to warn the newly promoted people that if they could not defend Subei well, they should go down and accompany these people. He also took this opportunity to completely separate the military and political power in Subei. Under the bloody means, no one dared to refute. Since then, Subei was peaceful for a long time. Shang Junlin and Shen Yu talked about the past. Shen thought that they would learn to be obedient. Indeed, they did learn to be obedient. They didn't dare to do anything blatantly and only did some small actions in private. They also thought of ways to prevent the news from spreading to the capital. Shen Yu said, "The greed of people is always endless. After getting a little, they will want more. Over time, their greed will grow and they will never be satisfied." It has been 7 or 8 years since that incident. Time can wear away a lot of things, but it can also change a lot of things. The officials promoted by Your Majesty may be trustworthy, but after so many years, no one can guarantee that they will not change at all. Shang Junlin said, "People's hearts are fickle. Shen knows that very well." Shen Yu said, "After the truth is found out, punish those who should be punished and reward those who have made contributions. After so many years, Your Majesty is no longer the same as before. There is no need to be constrained by a lack of manpower. In order to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, Your Majesty can set a time limit for appointment. After the officials sent to Subei have served for a certain number of years, Your Majesty can return to the capital." The officials in Subei were divided into 3 categories: the Subei army, the officials transferred from the capital, and the local officials. It should have been a tripartite situation, but according to the news from the Hidden Dragon Guards, the latter 2 had been mixed together. They had also planted people in the Subei army. Moreover, there was the shadow of another force among the 3. If the time limit is set, the officials sent from the capital will be less likely to stand on the same side as the local officials. Compared to Subei, they should want to return to the capital, the center of power. Then, they will spontaneously watch over Subei for the court in order to make their resumes look better. Shen Yu lowered his eyes and continued, "Once the time limit is up, they will return to the capital. Everything that happens in Subei will only become a stepping stone for their promotion. As long as their interests were not tied together with the officials in Subei, there was no need to worry that they would work together and harm the court." Shang Junlin seriously thought about it and realized that this was indeed a good idea. The mobility of the officials in Dahuan was not high. Unless they were particularly capable or had connections in the court, most of them would be sent to a certain place and most of them would stay there. If it was not a special place like Subei, there were many benefits to this. The more familiar the officials were with a certain place, the easier it would be for them to manage it. However, the most important thing right now was the disaster in Subei. As long as the drought did not subside, they would not be able to relax. Official Fong and the hidden dragon guards were in the open and in the dark, trying to understand the situation in Subei. Official Fong continued to lead the officials north. The further north they went, the more serious the disaster became. The officials from the capital also became more silent. They had never seen such a hellish scene. In the past, they had at most learned about the disaster through various documents. How could words compare to the shock of seeing it with their own eyes? The more they saw, the more they disagreed with the inaction of the officials in Subei. This was especially so when they heard more than once from the locals that if the disaster relief team had come earlier, perhaps not so many people would have died. The resentment in their hearts reached a peak. There were so many people. They could have saved their lives if they were willing to give them a share of the Subei army's military pay. The young official who spoke was choked with sobs. No one made a sound. No one who saw this scene could make a sound. In a destitute and dilapidated house, the emaciated mother did not have a single piece of good flesh on her body. Her child was curled up in her arms, a piece of flesh still wet in his mouth. It was obvious that the mother had bitten off the flesh from her body. Even in death, the mother stared at her child with wide eyes. If only we had come earlier. If only we had come earlier, perhaps we could have saved this mother and child. The house was filled with the thick stench of blood. No one complained about the pungent smell. They only felt a stabbing pain in their hearts. Along the way, they had seen all kinds of tragic scenes. They had thought that after seeing so much, they would become numb. It was only at this moment that they realized that no matter how many times they saw the scene in front of them, they could not become numb. Official Fong, can we really save Subei? After a long time, a young official could not help but ask. His face was full of confusion. Of course we can, Lord Fong replied firmly. We've already saved many people along the way. The imperial court has also collected enough supplies. Everyone, hold on for a few more days. They'll be here soon. Lord Fong looked at everyone's faces one by one. He knew that what he had seen and heard in the past few days had a great impact on these young officials. He also knew why they were so confused. It was because he had experienced the same thing in the past. Everyone, cheer up. News has come from His Majesty. This time, there are people from all over the country who are willing to come and help. The Disaster Relief Fund is also donated by the people of Daheng. Subei will not be abandoned by anyone in Daheng, the main city of Subei. In the magnificent main hall, young women in thin dance dresses danced to the music. Men in luxurious clothes raised their cups in celebration. That Fong Jun, are we going to let him continue like this? Don't ruin official Fong's plan. If he wants to see the real disaster in Subei, then let him see. He volunteered to work with the refugees. If he is accidentally injured by the refugees, it has nothing to do with us. Official Sun, don't you think so? Sun Zhao calmly looked around and drank the wine in his cup. Of course. It's not that we haven't tried to persuade him, but he is stubborn. If something really happens, how can we be blamed? Exactly. Come, let's continue drinking. Sun Zhao finished feigning civility with them and returned to his residence. Although he was not the highest official in Subei, his status was not low. When he returned home, the housekeeper came to greet him. Official Fong, have you drunk? Yes. Official Fong invited me, so I couldn't refuse. There were many colleagues at the banquet and they even talked about the refugees. Since ancient times, the refugees have been a difficult problem to solve. The housekeeper's eyes flashed. Official Fong, you should wash up first. I will order a bowl of hangover soup for you. Official Fong rubbed his forehead. I am a little dizzy. Help me in. In the darkness, a black rope silently streaked across the night sky. In an inconspicuous corner, a middle-aged man in a gray robe turned out of the courtyard and walked all the way to the corner of the street. There was an inconspicuous horse carriage parked there. "Did you find anything?" An emotionless voice came from the horse carriage. "Official Fong, everything is as usual. There are no suspicious people in the residence." The man in the gray robe replied carefully. "Sun residence." Sun Zhao rubbed his aching temples. He purposely said those words to the housekeeper in the courtyard just now so that he could pass the news to the hidden dragon guards hiding in the Sun residence. The housekeeper was also a member of the hidden dragon guards in disguise. However, there were other spies in the residence. The person in charge of passing the news was someone else. The capital. The resources collected from various places were transported to Subei. The capital was the first to receive the news and also the first to take action. The other places that were slightly further away would set off later. Other than the doctors, some young adults were also summoned from various places. The scorching summer was coming to an end. After a rain in the capital, the weather had cooled down significantly. "Is it still not raining in Subei?" Shen Yu looked out the window at the pitter-patter of raindrops. "No." Shang Junlin frowned. Although it rarely rains in Subei, it is rare for there to be no rain for several months like this year. There was already a discussion among the commoners about why there was no rain in Subei for several months. Droughts were often accompanied by locust plagues. Subei had already suffered a locust plague in May or June. Otherwise, there would not have been no harvest. If there is no rain for a long time, I am afraid there will be bad rumors. Shen Yu's words became a prophecy. Within a few days, rumors began to appear in various places. It was said that the drought in Subei was a warning to the emperor not to do anything unkind and not to break the ancestral rules. It was obvious that every rumor was directed at Shang Junlin's actions during this period. Chapter 117. These rumors were just short of pointing at Shang Junlin's nose and saying, "If it weren't for you, there wouldn't be a drought in Subei, and it's all your fault." The rumors were discovered very early, but they didn't reach the climax. It was funny that they were discovered so quickly, but it was all thanks to the people of various places. "Didn't you mention before that we can set up a suggestion box in each government office? If the people have any opinions, they can write in anonymously." In the past 2 days, many government offices have seen letters mentioning this matter in the suggestion box. They didn't dare delay and immediately sorted out the letters and handed them in. Not only are there letters from the capital, but there are also letters from other places. Shang Junlin didn't look angry when he spoke of this matter. This kind of thing was normal for the emperor. No matter what kind of natural disaster or man-made disaster, there would always be some people who liked to put the blame on the person in power. Not to mention other things, the previous emperor of Dahuan had encountered this kind of thing. These people think that by putting the blame on His Majesty, they can achieve their goal. Shen Yu smoothly poured tea for the two of them and pushed one of the cups in front of Shang Junlin. No matter what their goal is, it's destined to be in vain. Although Shen Yu had expected such a thing to happen, he still felt angry that it had really happened. Shang Junlin had done his best to work for Dahuan, and after finding out about the situation in Subei, he had also done his best to resolve this matter. In the end, all of this had become evidence to destroy him. "Don't frown because of this." Shang Junlin reached out and touched Shen Yu's cheek. "It's not a big deal. With the use precautions in advance, they can't make any waves. Didn't the people tell us when there were just rumors? Even so, I still don't want to hear them speak ill of His Majesty." Since he had guessed what those people would do, Shen Yu certainly wouldn't sit still and wait for death. Whether it was the suggestion box, the newspapers that were targeted at all the people, or the special channels that passed information to the capital, they were all in order to deal with this matter. The commoners were the easiest to incite. If those people wanted to incite the commoners to be dissatisfied with Shang Junlin, they would definitely find people to spread rumors among the commoners. They would deliberately distort the facts and exaggerate a certain part of the matter to incite the anger of the commoners. Then, they would further discredit the commoners. This kind of thing had happened more than once or twice. Shinyu had listed a few cases, summarized the routine, and then resolved them one by one. In fact, it was very easy. The other party was able to succeed one after another because of the lack of information. The commoners did not know much about the imperial court, and even less about Shang Junlin. All their impressions were obtained from the mouths of others. Whether it was good or bad depended on the speaker. Shinyu directly told them what the imperial court had done, what the emperor had done, and why he had done these things. Compared to hearing it from unknown people, the commoners clearly believed the information given by the imperial court more. After all, the president of Subei was here. The daily situation in Subei was known to them from the imperial court. This eliminated the possibility of a middleman relaying information that might cause a difference in information. The imperial court directly passed down the information, which was more objective and direct. In addition, Shinyu had written some conspiracies about the protagonist in Return to Spring. After the people finished reading it, they would unconsciously remember these. When they encountered similar things, they could not help but think, is this a conspiracy like in the drama? In short, with the support of various reasons, the situation not only did not develop as the people behind the scenes wanted, but it was also reported to the imperial court by the commoners who heard it. In the tea house. It rained in the capital last night. I don't know how the situation in Subei is like. The news that came back 2 days ago was that it hasn't rained there yet. However, the supplies we collected are almost here. I hope they can be put to use soon. Don't you think it's strange? It's raining everywhere, so why isn't it raining in Subei? An unfamiliar man in gray suddenly spoke up. The people who were talking suddenly fell silent. After a while, someone smiled and poured a cup of tea for himself. What's so strange about it? It rained in the capital last night, but that doesn't mean it rained everywhere in the Great Huan. That's right. It's normal for the weather to be different from place to place. Sometimes, half of the capital is raining and the other half is sunny. Let's not talk too far. Just last night, it didn't rain everywhere. That's right. It didn't rain in my house. Today, I heard from you that it rained in many places. The gray-clothed man was deflated. He wanted to say something else, but the people around him had already started talking about other topics. They looked at him as if he was an uncultured man. He almost fainted in anger. That's right. Have you heard? The imperial court is preparing to open a new school in the capital. At that time, not only will they accept male students, but they will also accept female students. It said that there will be a lot of things to teach. It won't be restricted to the imperial examinations. You can also pass the examination and directly enter the Ministry of Works and other departments. My son won't study no matter what. I originally didn't have much hope. If he can learn something else and enter the imperial court, it'll be better than working in the fields like me for the rest of his life. Where did you hear this from? Is it reliable? The People's Report, but it only mentioned a little. The imperial court is probably busy with the matters in Subei, so they won't have the energy to do this for the time being. If they can accept women, then can I also send my daughter there? No, don't you think it's against common sense for women to be officials? The gray-clothed man listened to them talk for a long time, and even began to excitedly imagine sending his daughter into the school. He couldn't help but speak up. I say, why are you so strange? Why do you think that women can't be officials? Didn't Zhao Nyang in the play become an official in the end? It's much better than that man who is a corrupt official. You said it yourself, that's in the play, so what? I'm just fantasizing about my daughter becoming an official. If you don't like it, then don't listen. I've seen his daughter before. She's smart and quick-witted, just like Zhao Nyang. She'll definitely be a good official in the future. Everyone chatted together for fun. The middle-aged man was an honest man, and he only had one daughter in his family. She was smart and likable, so everyone was happy to support him. In fact, they were just joking. No one would take their half-joking words to heart. Unfortunately, the gray-clothed man didn't know that. He thought that they were sincerely accepting women as officials, so he swallowed his unfinished words. He originally wanted to say that it was against the heavens for women to be officials, and that this might be the reason for the drought in Subei. But now, he didn't dare to say it. Right, the donation you mentioned, shouldn't the disaster relief be the imperial court's matter? Why do you have to do it? As a citizen of Dahuan, we'll do what we can. We can't always rely on the imperial court for everything. It's not like the imperial court didn't do anything. The gray-clothed man swallowed his words again. He really didn't understand. Why did these people always side with the imperial court? It was as if they had suddenly become smart. They weren't so hard to fool before. The atmosphere in the tea house was still lively. The storyteller was telling a story based on the news from Subei. Everyone was paying attention to Subei's situation, so they loved to hear stories like this. The gray-clothed man observed for a while longer. After confirming that there was no chance to make a move, he left the tea house with his tail between his legs. After he left, the two men sitting not far away looked at each other and followed him. In the small alley, the gray-clothed man walked quickly with his head down. He had to report the news quickly. They seemed to have been deceived. Their original plan didn't work at all. Suddenly, the gray-clothed man stopped. Two men wearing similar clothes blocked his path. Sir, may I know your name? Can you come with us? Who are you? The gray-clothed man stared at them warily. You'll know our identities when you come with us. The gray-clothed man realized that something was wrong and turned to flee. The two men had been guarding him for several days. How could they let him leave just like that? They raised their feet and chased after him. The gray-clothed man only knew a few simple moves. How could he compare to the two well-trained men? Not long after, his path was blocked again. This time, the two men didn't say much and tied him up. We've caught another little mouse. The gray-clothed man was shocked. Judging from the familiarity of the two men's movements, it was clearly not their first time doing this. No wonder they had sent so many people but had no effect at all. The imperial court had been prepared for this. Unfortunately, he found out too late and didn't have the chance to report to his master. Even now, he still held on to a glimmer of hope. Have you found the wrong person? I don't know you. I really don't know you. Why have you caught me? We don't need to know you. We only need to know what you've done. The gray-clothed man's heart sank. He wanted to say something, but his mouth was blocked by the impatient man beside him. He clapped his hands and said, "Why waste words with this person? Someone will interrogate him when we get there. Now, we have peace." The two men brought the tied-up gray-clothed man back to the Supreme Court. You've caught another one. Yes, we've caught quite a few recently. I don't know if you found out anything. Along the way, the gray-clothed man listened to the conversation between the two men and his colleagues. His face was ashen. Their plan this time might become a complete joke. But he didn't know that things were far from over. Yuzhang Palace. Shen Yu sat by the window and slowly poured a cup of tea for himself. Mushi, what's the situation outside the palace? Young master's guess is right. Those people are hiding in restaurants, tea houses, and other places with a lot of people. They want to take the opportunity to incite the people. After our men saw through them a few times, the others also realized that they weren't fooled. Instead, they blocked those people and made them speechless. The Supreme Court has already arrested many people. I was wondering why the people suddenly spoke in unison. It turns out that a youth sent people to guide them. Shang Junlin walked in from outside. Eunuch Meng followed behind him with a memorial. It can be so effective because Your Majesty is wholeheartedly serving the people. After Your Majesty ascended the throne, the lives of the people have been getting better and better. They know this in their hearts. If it weren't for the fact that he had made great achievements, how could he convince the people with just a few words? In a youth's heart, am I so good? Shang Junlin walked over. Shen Yu wore a light blue wide-sleeved robe today. His snow-white wrist stretched out from the wide sleeves. He was fiddling with the tea set in a relaxed and elegant manner. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's wrist and gently rubbed it. The young man's skin was white and tender, like the best white jade. It was very admirable. Your Majesty is naturally the best in my heart. Shen Yu picked up the brewed tea with his other hand and fed it to Shang Junlin. This cup is to reward Your Majesty. Chapter 118. Shang Junlin lowered his head and took a sip from Shen Yu's hand. He slowly savored the taste and said, "The tea this time seems to be different from the last time. You learned a new technique from the book. How is it compared to the last time?" The palace had a rich collection of books and Shang Junlin did not guard against him. At first, Shen Yu was reserved and did not pay attention to the books that were not sensitive to him. Later on, he became closer to Shang Junlin and no longer restrained himself. He would read the books that he was interested in. No matter what technique you uses, the tea is still delicious to me. Before Shen Yu entered the palace, Shang Junlin only knew a little about tea. He was not passionate about it. Later on, Shen Yu would occasionally brew tea for him and tell him about the tea ceremony. This made him more fond of tea. Rather than saying that he liked tea, it was more like he liked the feeling of drinking tea with Shen Yu. Shang Junlin drank the entire cup of tea with Shen Yu's hand. Then, he took the empty cup from Shen Yu's hand and put it on the small table at the side. How many people have they arrested now? Did they find out anything? One of Shen Yu's hands was still held by Shang Junlin. The two of them sat on the soft couch. According to a Yu's method, I asked them to pay more attention to the places where people gather. If they find something wrong, they will check and confirm that there is no mistake before arresting them. Not only in the capital, but also in other places. The order was sent to the place along with the news. It was sent through another special channel. The arrests were also carried out secretly. The people behind the scenes did not know that the people they sent out to spread the rumors were all in jail. We have also received news of the interrogation. Most of the people we captured were just following orders from the higher-ups. We were unable to get much useful information out of them. However, according to the clues we obtained from them, we found out a few of their hiding spots. I have asked the hidden dragon guards to investigate their backgrounds. They didn't take action as soon as they found out because they didn't want to alert the enemy. These people had been hiding in the Great Huan land for many years. Now that they were finally discovered, of course they had to follow the clues and get rid of them all in one go. Regarding these matters, Shen Yu had always only given suggestions and never really intervened. It was not because he was afraid of Shang Junlin, but because he simply didn't want to. Your Majesty, do you still remember the flower that Prince An sent over? I always felt that there was something wrong with that flower, but I couldn't find anything wrong with it. The vassal kings sent a lot of things, most of them were gold, silver and jewels. Only the Enwang sent a strange flower for no apparent reason. Shang Junlin also knew about the existence of this flower. Shen Yu had told him about it before. Did the people from the Imperial Institute of Medicine come to take a look? He was worried that this flower would affect Shen Yu, so he put the flower alone in a corner and didn't ask anyone to take care of it. As a result, after a period of time, the flower didn't wither because of lack of care. Instead, it bloomed more beautifully. Yes, Imperial Physician Goose said that this flower was similar to the ones that appeared in the ancient books. However, there were some differences when you looked at it carefully. The other Imperial physicians also came to take a look. The attendants in charge of taking care of the flowers in the palace also took a look. Other than being sure that it wasn't poisonous, they couldn't tell what kind of flower it was. Shen Yu felt that it was very strange. Your Majesty, why do you think Prince An sent this flower over for no reason? If Yu doesn't like it, just ask someone to throw it away. Shang Junlin stroked his hair that was hanging down behind his back. What kind of flower does Yu want? I'll find it and send it over. Just leave it there for now. This flower always gives me a very strange feeling. Prince An shouldn't be so stupid as to give the Imperial Palace something that can be used against him. I'll listen to Yu. However, Yu shouldn't get close to the flower. Just ask someone to take care of it. I'll find someone who knows about flowers and plants to take a look. After confirming that there's no problem with the flower, Yu can go take a look if she wants to. Shen Yu also had the same plan. She nodded in the man's arms. Shang Junlin brought up another matter. The first batch of goods from the capital to Subei will probably arrive today. It's finally here. Looking at Fong Darren's memorial, the officials he brought over are almost at their limits. Shen Yu had personally witnessed the aftermath of a natural disaster in her previous life. She knew what kind of hell it was. No matter how good one's endurance was, they wouldn't be able to endure it for a few more days. Fong Jun wants to bring those people back. Shang Junlin stroked the strand of hair in his hand. Especially two of the younger ones. Their condition isn't very good. When I mentioned it to them, they weren't willing to come back. Among those two, one of them had once wanted to give the youth food. In just a few days, his understanding of the past few years had almost changed. After knowing that the imperial court had sent many people in addition to the goods, Fong Jun called the officials who had followed him for a period of time together and asked, "Do any of you want to go back?" "Darren, why are you suddenly asking this? There are still so many places in Subei that we haven't visited yet. How can we go back?" One of them answered without hesitation. "Yes, we have to finish what we started. Since we're here, we naturally have to finish what we started before we leave." In fact, at the beginning, a few of the officials were very uncomfortable. They were the children of aristocratic families and had never experienced such hardships since they were young. They had grown up in luxury and didn't know that the lives of the common people would be so difficult. They didn't deny that they had thoughts of retreating, but these thoughts were obliterated by one incident after another. On the contrary, an indescribable ambition grew in their hearts. The confusion of their previous life as officials was swept away, and the conviction in their hearts was strengthened. Hadn't they originally wanted to be good officials to benefit the common people? If they hadn't come out on this trip, if they hadn't seen these hellish scenes and shocking scenes, perhaps they would have spent the rest of their lives in confusion. But now, they wouldn't. After experiencing this incident, they knew what kind of burden they were shouldering. As officials, they shouldn't look at power, but the responsibility behind the scenes. The imperial court's reinforcements will arrive soon. If any of you want to rest, you can return to the capital with them first, Lord Fong said as he looked at the officials whose spirits had greatly changed. The crowd fell silent. Did they want to go back? Of course they did. Compared to the capital, the environment here was truly too harsh and vile. If Lord Fong had asked this question a few days ago, perhaps some of them would have wavered. But now, after experiencing so much, they asked themselves, were they willing to go back like this? They still hadn't seen the leg of the old man next door get better, they still hadn't seen the birth of their wife's child, they still hadn't seen. There were still too many things that they had yet to see. If they went back like this, how could they be at ease? I won't go. I won't leave until I'm certain that the disaster in Subei is alleviated. After the first person spoke, a second, a third, all of them spoke. Without exception, the answer they gave was that they weren't willing to leave. Lord Fong had expected this. He had seen the changes in these people with his own eyes. It could be said that he had personally witnessed the changes in these people. Several of the muddle-headed scions of aristocratic families in the capital had undergone massive changes at a speed visible to the naked eye. Lord Fong was happy for them, but at the same time, his heart ached for them. This was because these changes meant that they had experienced immense pain in their hearts. The scions of aristocratic families who had grumbled when they first arrived would no longer complain no matter how hard or tiring the work was. There were also faint calluses on their hands. Lord Fong scanned these people's faces one by one. Their expressions were resolute and their eyes showed that they weren't willing to back down. He slowly retracted his gaze and unconsciously said in a gentle voice, "Don't be in a hurry to answer. You have one night to consider. I have already told His Majesty about your achievements. When you return to the capital, these will not be affected because of your early departure." The next day, everyone's answer remained the same. They were all willing to stay here until the day they saw Subei get better with their own eyes. Lord Fong didn't say anything else. He just objectively wrote down this matter on a memorial and had the hidden dragon guards send it back to the capital. Shen Yu found the memorials that were sent from the northern Su province. Just like before, Master Fong wrote 2 memorials. One was sent back to the capital through the hidden dragon guards while the other was sent back through official channels. The latter was usually a few days slower than the former. Shen Yu opened the memorial and read through it. It seems that Lord Fong has a good opinion of these officials who followed him. Half of the officials who went to the disaster relief were from the lesser aristocratic families. Lord Fong was the leader. At the beginning, there was some friction between the two parties. Now, both parties were able to put aside their differences and work together harmoniously. Compared to when they left the capital, both parties had changed a lot. Those who followed Lord Fong to Subei were mainly young officials. If there were no accidents, these people would become the pillars of the imperial court in the future. This experience was extremely beneficial to both them and the imperial court. Because the news from the imperial court was that the people from the imperial court would directly meet with them, Lord Fong brought his people and stayed in the small city to rest and wait for them to arrive. Their resources were almost depleted. Every time they arrived at a place, they had to leave behind a portion. Most of the resources they brought were left in the main city. If there were no more resources along the way, they could only return to the main city first. The imperial court had sent an army to escort the resources. On the way, the officials in the main city had also received the news. "Lord, if we don't act now, when the people from the imperial court arrive, it will be too late." In the dim study, the person who spoke was hidden in the shadows, his voice hoarse. "Go arrange it. Do it cleanly. Don't let anyone discover that something is wrong. Lord, don't worry. This lowly one is very good at this. There definitely won't be any mistakes." The door to the study was opened and closed. The wind blew the candlelight, as if nothing had happened. Lord Fong's group had been on the move for many days and finally had a moment to rest. They took the officials who had come with them to look around. This small city was a bit further north than the first one they had gone to, and the disaster was more serious. However, they had already given out porridge for several days, and the disaster relief work had been carried out smoothly. The situation was much better than when they had first arrived. As they walked, the disaster victims put down what they were doing and greeted them. The officials smiled in response. Occasionally, they would stop and talk to the people on the side of the road. I suddenly feel that these days are not bad. The official behind Lord Fong sighed. That's right. In the past, when we were in the capital, we felt that we were very powerful and amazing. Only after coming here did we realize how shallow we were in the past. The officials whispered to each other. The atmosphere was relaxed and lively. The gap between the humble officials and the aristocratic officials had completely disappeared here. Lord Fong listened to their conversation with a hint of a smile in his eyes. Suddenly, the crowd in front of them surged in their direction. The youth beside Lord Fong grabbed him and shielded him behind him. Lord, be careful. Chapter 119. Just as the youth finished speaking, the refugees in front of them suddenly charged at them with a clear target. Protect Darren. The officials stared at this scene with their mouths agape, unable to figure out what had happened. The guards surrounded them in the middle, but the other side had more people and they had fewer people. Although they looked like refugees, they were very skilled and their target was clear. They went straight for Darren Fong, who was surrounded by the crowd. The youth was like a wolf cub, standing in front of Darren Fong to prevent anyone from getting close. The attack happened in an instant, and the people around them didn't even have time to react. Facing the surging killing intent, Darren Fong was very calm. He could see that these people's true target was him. He calmly said, "Protect them, don't worry about me." Saying this, he wanted to separate from the crowd. He could guess that these people were sent by some officials in Subei main city. They probably felt that his arrival had ruined their plans and wanted to eliminate him. Although the officials following Darren Fong were frightened, they had experienced some things in the past few days and weren't as rash as they were at the beginning. They surrounded Darren Fong, unwilling to leave. Through this period of time, they knew very well how much Darren Fong had done. Any one of them could be injured or even killed, but Darren Fong couldn't. They wouldn't watch Darren Fong get hurt in front of them. The refugees didn't care about the officials in front of them. Even though they had some training, these people's strength couldn't compare to the people who came with a purpose. Soon, they were thrown to the side. Soon, someone broke through the crowd and came in front of Darren Fong. He picked up something in his hand and stabbed at Darren Fong. Midway, he was stopped by a pair of scarred hands. It was the youth who had been following Darren Fong. The youth had brute strength. For a moment, the people couldn't do anything to him. The person saw that there wasn't much time left and ruthlessly stabbed at the youth. Careful. The youth leaned to the side and barely dodged, but a wound still appeared on his waist. Blood instantly dyed the clothes on his waist red. Lord Fong frowned. Over the years, he had learned some martial arts and was barely able to deal with the people in front of him. However, he did not dare to delay. He was afraid that these people would ignore everything and hurt the other officials and the surrounding people. There were many busy commoners on this road. After Lord Fong came, he found some work for them so that they could eat their fill. They were also willing to do something for their hometown. Just now, they didn't react. Now that they saw that the group of unidentified people wanted to attack the officials who brought them food, they were instantly displeased. What are you doing? Where are you from? If you dare to harm my lord, you'll have to ask for our permission first. Everyone took their tools and surrounded him. The group of refugees didn't expect more and more people to surround them. They even deliberately chose a place with fewer people to attack. Who would have thought that Lord Fong just happened to send a lot of people here to do things? After experiencing drought, locusts, and famine, the people were sincerely grateful to Lord Fong who had brought them food. Lord Fong's arrival told them that they had not been abandoned by the court. Lord Fong had brought them food and hope. They would not allow anyone to try to harm these officials who had helped them. With the addition of the commoners, the situation was reversed. The refugees were surrounded by the commoners. In order to disguise themselves more, they didn't bring too many weapons that didn't fit their identity as refugees. Their numbers were also smaller than the commoners who surrounded them. Lord Fong and the other officials, don't be afraid. With us here, we won't let these refugees who came from nowhere hurt you. The men from the north were all tall and strong. After Lord Fong came, they were able to eat their fill. They weren't at a disadvantage against these refugees. The officials helped each other up. When they saw the aggressive commoners surrounding the refugees, they felt as if their roles had been reversed. Why did these commoners look even fiercer than the people who had attacked them? The commoners didn't care. They weren't afraid of getting hurt. They broke through the encirclement of the refugees and protected Lord Fong and the others. The commoners who came from behind gradually formed a circle and surrounded the refugees in the middle. In the stalemate, the sound of horse hooves gradually approached. Lord Fong looked in the direction of the sound. A well-trained soldier wearing armor quickly walked over. What happened? The commoners looked at these people warily. The leader looked at them one by one. When he saw Lord Fong in the middle of the crowd, he clasped his hands and said, "Lord Fong, your subordinate Yang Ziyuan is here to deliver supplies. General Yang, please capture these people dressed as refugees." Lord Fong remembered that the general sent by the imperial court to deliver the supplies was surnamed Yang. The refugees saw that the situation was hopeless and rose up to attack. The commoners who surrounded them were caught off guard and were almost injured. General Yang's men acted in time and didn't cause more casualties. General Yang's army was well disciplined and equipped with elite weapons. They quickly captured all the refugees. Today, I thank all of you for saving my life. Let me thank all of you in advance. No need, no need. The burly man at the front waved his hand. If it wasn't for Lord Fong, we wouldn't be here today. No matter what, we can't let Lord Fong be harmed by these bandits. The others nodded. Seeing this scene, the eyes of the young officials behind Lord Fong couldn't help but turn red. In truth, they had never thought that they would receive anything in return for the things they had done. But today, they were protected by these people who had helped them without fear of death. They were moved beyond words. At this moment, they made a decision in their hearts. In the future, they must become good officials who can benefit the commoners. General Yang followed the large group from the capital and walked a little slower. Lord Fong looked in the direction they came from and could faintly see the shadows of the carriages. "We noticed that there was movement here, so we came to take a look first," General Yang explained. "Since we met, let's go together." Lord Fong looked at the young man beside him who didn't seem to care about his injuries and asked, "General, do you have medicine with you?" "My guard was injured in order to protect me." General Yang took out a bottle of medicine and handed it to Lord Fong. "There are a few imperial physicians with us. When they arrive, they can take a look at this young friend." "Thank you." Some of the commoners were also lightly injured. Lord Fong found a place to rest nearby and put the injured people together to wait for the large group to arrive. Not long after, the large group arrived. General Yang went up to say a few words and came back with two people dressed as doctors. "Dr. Wu." Lord Fong was surprised when he saw who it was. Lord Fong. After the two exchanged greetings, Lord Fong and his disciples came forward to check the injuries of the injured people. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured. The young man's wound was carefully bandaged. Dr. Wu also treated the wounds of the other injured people. A tall man said casually, "It's really nothing. When the north was in chaos, we often had to fight with the people of the northern desert. This kind of injury happened every few days. There's no need to care at all. It will heal on its own in 2 or 3 days." "Will the people of the northern desert still come here?" An official couldn't help but ask. Yes, before the northern desert was defeated by His Majesty, this place was in chaos. The slightest carelessness could cause death. These men of the northern desert grew up fighting with the people of the northern desert. They were ferocious in their bones, so when they saw someone disguised as a refugee attacking Lord Fong and his group, they dared to surround them. This kind of situation was a common occurrence in the northern desert a few years ago. After a simple rest, the group headed to their destination. On the way, Lord Fong learned a lot of news from General Yang. Lord Fong looked at the carriages behind him. "Aren't these things sent to the main city? His Majesty said to let you handle it. Since the officials in the main city don't need help, we don't need to worry about them. His Majesty also told me to pass on a message to you. It's time to act." This sentence was a signal. Before Lord Fong came, Shang Junlin had privately summoned him and told him that the journey to the northern desert was dangerous. He also gave him an item and told him to wait for orders from the capital. Now, General Yang was telling him that it was time to act. General Yang and his group settled down with a large number of supplies. Lord Fong gathered the low-level officials and announced, "I'm going back to the main city. I'll leave this place to you." After handing over the matters here, Lord Fong mounted his horse and walked for a while. Suddenly, he stopped and said to the empty space behind him, "Didn't I tell you to wait for me here?" The young man walked out from the corner. What happened in the northern desert was passed on to Shang Junlin through the hidden dragon guards. Shen Yu also knew about it. Lord Fong saved a young man in the northern desert, and he's being blamed. Fong Jun wants to send the young man back to the capital first. What he's going to do is too dangerous. It's not suitable for the young man to follow him. Therefore, when the carriages returned from the disaster relief in the northern desert, they also gave a young man as a gift. Shen Yu was curious about the young man who saved Lord Fong and wanted to meet him. Fong Jun asked me to take care of him. Let's meet him first. It was not appropriate to directly summon him into the palace. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin changed into casual clothes and left the palace. Shen Yu wanted to talk to Yan Jing about the next cooperation. Shang Junlin had a lot of houses outside the palace. Some of them were where he lived before he ascended the throne. This time, he chose to meet the young man at a place where he lived for a short period of time before he ascended the throne. Shang Junlin led Shen Yu inside. At that time, I had just returned from the border and was not liked by the previous emperor. There was nothing in the palace. Therefore, Fong Jun found a house for me. Shen Yu looked around. The house was not big, but the environment was very quiet. It could be seen that some places were old, but they were still carefully maintained. It was obvious that the owner cared about this place. "Your Majesty has never brought me here before," Shen Yu said as he looked around. "I have a lot of houses in various places. If there is a chance in the future, I will bring you to live there. However, most of them are at the border. I don't know if you can get used to the environment there." Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand, his eyes filled with tenderness. "If your Majesty can live there, then I can naturally live there." Shen Yu smiled and looked at him. "I don't know how delicate I am in your Majesty's eyes. In my eyes, you deserves the best." Shang Junlin had been at the border for a long time. He was very clear about the environment there. He could bring a Yu to live there temporarily, but he was not willing to let a Yu live there for a long time. Turning around the corner, Shin-Yu saw the young man standing in the courtyard. The young man heard the sound and turned around. His face was blank for a moment. Have I seen you before? Chapter 120. Shang Junlin held Shin-Yu's hand and walked over. Hearing this, he couldn't help but look at Shin-Yu. Before Fong Darren sent the young man back to the capital, he wrote down the young man's background in the memorial. If there was no accident, the young man had never come to the capital. As far as he knew, Shin-Yu had never been to Subei, so the two shouldn't have crossed paths. Understanding this point, Shang Junlin looked at the young man with scrutinizing eyes. Shin-Yu carefully looked at the young man's appearance. The young man's half-length black hair was casually tied behind his head. His appearance was handsome with a hint of immaturity, and the color of his eyes was light. If he really had contact with the young man, it was impossible for him not to have any impression of him. Are you sure the person you saw was me? Shin-Yu asked. Shang Junlin held Shin-Yu's hand tightly. The young man thought for a while and nodded. Then, under the gaze of Shin-Yu, who was looking at a stranger, he shook his head slightly. I don't know. Shin-Yu pulled Shang Junlin to the stone table and sat down. What's going on? When I was young, I saw a person who looked like Guijun. The youth finally reacted. The first time he saw that person was many years ago. That person's appearance had given him a great shock when he was young. So much so that when he saw Shin-Yu, who looked almost the same as that person, he couldn't help but ask this question. Shin-Yu and Shang Junlin looked at each other. They didn't expect to hear such a sentence from the young man's mouth. Do you still remember what happened at that time? Shin-Yu asked. I don't really remember. I only remember that Subei was very chaotic and there were wars everywhere. I accidentally fell into the trap of the northern desert people and was rescued by a very good-looking person. Many years had passed, and he was still young at that time. The young man could only remember the beautiful face of that person under the moonlight and the cold temperature when that person held him. That was the first time he was held in someone's arms since he could remember. It was also the only time. It was a secret hidden in the deepest part of his memory that he would never say. After the young man finished speaking, he glanced at Shin-Yu and added, just as good-looking as Guijun. Before coming to the capital, Lord Fong had told the young man many things about the capital and told him to follow the rules and be obedient. The young man trusted Lord Fong very much and agreed to everything. On the way to the capital, Lord Fong had entrusted him with many things about the capital, such as the emperor, the nobles, and so on. That person had told him that the emperor was as bright as the moon and could be recognized at a glance. At first, he didn't believe it, but when he saw the real person, he suddenly realized that the person wasn't exaggerating. Seeing the young man staring at Shin-Yu, Shang Junlin's eyes flashed with displeasure. It was another person who looked like her. Together with Shin-Yu, this was the second one. Shin-Yu lowered his eyes and pondered. In his previous life, he had lived for more than 10 years, but he had never encountered such a situation. Was it a coincidence? Or did his rebirth change something? Shin-Yu was more inclined to the latter. Shang Junlin knocked on the table. Tell me what you know. Although he was displeased, this matter was very likely related to Shin-Yu's past. Shang Junlin couldn't just ignore a little displeasure in his heart. That's all I remember. That person saved me, put me in a safe place and left. Later, I searched many places, but I couldn't find any trace of this person. Later, I secretly asked people to inquire, but they all said that they had never seen such a person. Suddenly appearing and disappearing without a trace, Shin-Yu thought of his mother. Could the person the young man met be related to his mother? After confirming that the young man really didn't know any more information, Shin-Yu gave up asking. Shang Junlin didn't want the young man to keep focusing on Shin-Yu, so he took the initiative to ask about Subei. The young man followed Fong Darren, so he was very clear about what happened to Fong Darren during this period. Before coming, Fong Darren also told him that Her Majesty would ask him some questions. He didn't want him to hide anything and answer truthfully. The young man remembered Fong Darren's instructions. When he heard Shang Junlin's question, he pulled back his thoughts and talked about what happened in Subei. The young man was clearly prepared in advance. His answers were clear and organized, without any superfluous words. Through the young man's words, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin had a better understanding of what happened to Fong Darren in Subei. With a steady flow of supplies, the situation in Subei improved greatly. This time, the military escorts were sent all the way, and the Subei army was also there to provide support. There were no more incidents of bandits along the way. The group of hidden dragon guards that Gu Huai had brought with him was focused on investigating the internal problems in Subei. Other than saving Fong Darren, they hadn't shown their faces again. No one knew that they had already infiltrated the upper echelons of Subei and were collecting evidence. They were only one step away from delivering a fatal blow. Those upper echelons of Subei were still dreaming of pocketing the disaster relief supplies that were being sent to Subei from various places. The imperial court is really something. They actually skipped the main city and sent all these things to the surrounding small cities. They're just a bunch of foolish people. What's there to save? You can say these words in front of us, but you can't say them in front of those officials from the capital. I still know my limits. Come, let's continue drinking. The people drinking and making merry still didn't know that the scythe of the Grim Reaper was already hanging over their heads. Those refugees are also incompetent. We let them take advantage of the chaos to kill Fong Jun, but the result is great. They didn't manage to kill him and were even captured. Darren, those people won't sell us out, right? Do you think that I'm so stupid that I would leave evidence behind? No matter how Fong Jun interrogated those people, they would only get one result. They didn't know that Darren Fong only locked them up and didn't spend any effort to interrogate them. He already knew the result, so why bother? Shen Yu and Shang Junlin obtained more details about the assassination from the young man. They pretended to be refugees and acted. They had a good plan. If their plan succeeded, they would be able to provoke the conflict between the officials sent by the imperial court and the local people. At the same time, they would be able to clear their names. It's killing two birds with one stone. Shang Junlin tightened his grip on the cup in his hand. Shen Yu rescued the innocent cup from Shang Junlin's hand. Your Majesty, there's no need to be angry over these people who will be dealt with sooner or later. Darren Fong has already successfully handed over the task to the hidden dragon guards. After a few more days, those people won't be able to laugh even if they want to. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's wrist and pulled her into his arms. If everyone can be like you, I won't be so troubled. Your Majesty, don't think about these unrealistic things. Even if it's me, I won't be able to maintain my original self even after being in the imperial court for a few years. It was easy to say that power blinded people. Maintaining one's original self was easy, but since ancient times, how many people could actually do it? Let's not talk about this anymore. Is Yanjing going to bring people to the north soon? Shang Junlin held a strand of Shen Yu's hair and twirled it in his hand. The last time they went out of the palace, other than meeting the young man, they also met Yanjing. Coincidentally, there were a lot of supplies that needed to be transported to Subei from the capital. There were also military escorts for the entire journey. Yanjing wanted to take this opportunity to test the waters. He chose the northern desert as his first destination. In the private room, Yanjing expressed his thoughts. The relationship between the northern desert and our Great Huan Kingdom has been stable these years. I also have caravans going there. If we go to the northern desert at this time, we can not only borrow the military escort, but also go to the northern desert to scout for information. Shin Yu was taken aback by his bold idea. Choosing such a time of crisis to go over, no, it's very dangerous, but at the same time, it will also be accompanied by great opportunities. Yanjing poured a cup of tea for himself and slowly drank it. As a businessman, we must not forget the word seize the opportunity. I believe that the things in my hands can bring me a lot of wealth. Yanjing never hid his ambition. In front of Shin Yu and Shang Junlin, he didn't have to deliberately hide anything. Many times, being frank and open made people appreciate him more. It's good that you've decided. I'll prepare the things you need. When you arrive at the northern desert, be careful. Yanjing didn't expect Shin Yu to say words of concern. He was stunned for a moment and then said, even if it's for our long-term cooperation, I'll come back safely. Shang Junlin sat next to Shin Yu. At that time, he didn't have any reaction to this conversation. But after returning to the palace that night, he fiercely bullied Shin Yu. Now, there were still traces of him on Shin Yu's body. Shin Yu didn't expect Shang Junlin to suddenly mention this matter. He raised his eyebrows. Your Majesty, you're not jealous this time. Shang Junlin changed to rubbing the skin on Shin Yu's neck. There were still traces of him there. Not only on the neck, but also on other parts of the body that were covered. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened when he thought of that night when the young man's skin was dyed red little by little. You, tell me, why am I jealous? The man's voice was low and hoarse. When it entered Shin Yu's ears, it was as if he had returned to that night. The man also used the same voice and asked Shin Yu over and over again. If Shin Yu didn't answer, or if his answer didn't satisfy the man, he would be bullied even more severely. Shin Yu couldn't remember how many things he shouldn't have said under Shang Junlin's coaxing that night. Anyway, when he woke up the next day, there wasn't a single spot on his body that was unharmed. Shin Yu faintly felt a little hot when his memory was awakened. It's indeed in these 2 days. Shin Yu forced himself to clear those memories from his mind. His caravan will depart with the second batch of disaster relief supplies. Time passed in the blink of an eye. Yanjing followed the large group out of the city. During the rest time, he looked back at the capital and thought that abandoning those useless people to come to the capital was probably the most correct decision he had ever made. In Yuzhang Palace, Shin Yu's eyes were tightly closed. His long eyelashes fluttered uneasily, casting a shadow. Tears seeped out of the corners of his eyes, and the corners of his eyes were dyed with a layer of rouge, making him even more charming and moving. The tall man in black held him tightly in his arms and kissed him hard. Just like Shang Junlin himself, this kiss was rude and overbearing, with a strong sense of invasion. It was as if he was ruthless and wanted to tear the young man apart and eat him up. Shin Yu could only be forced to accept it. You, don't think about other people. I will be angry. Shang Junlin moved back a little, his lips still pressed against Shin Yu's. Your Majesty is unreasonable. You were the one who mentioned it first. Shin Yu opened his eyes. The mist in his eyes hadn't dissipated, and his eyes were glittering, making people sink into them at a glance. Shin Yu didn't forget that this time, it was Shang Junlin who mentioned Yanjing first. Because of what happened that night, he wouldn't mention Yanjing in front of Shang Junlin these days. Shang Junlin's kiss turned upwards, and finally kissed the pair of eyes that made him obsessed. Shin Yu closed his eyes and enjoyed the warmth of this moment. This time, I misunderstood you, Shang Junlin apologized in a low voice, but the words he said had a deeper meaning. You can be punished however he wants. Chapter 121. Shin Yu glared at him. In the end, are you punishing me or punishing His Majesty? Shin Yu didn't forget that after the last incident, he was bedridden for several days. Rather than punishing Shang Junlin, it was better to say that he was rewarding Shang Junlin. Of course, it's punishing me. You can do whatever you want. Shang Junlin's voice was as soft as a whisper, with an inexplicable ambiguous meaning, like a hook that crossed Xinyu's heart. The two were very close to each other. Xinyu could clearly feel the change in the man's body, so she deliberately rubbed against him. As she wished, she saw the change in the man's face. What did His Majesty do wrong? Xinyu deliberately said, why does he need to be punished? Seeing that his goal was not achieved, Shang Junlin's heart flashed with a touch of loss. He wanted to feel Yu's enthusiasm and initiative again, but he didn't show it on his face. Yu said no need, so there is no need. Xinyu's eyes moved, then she grabbed Shang Junlin's collar and slightly narrowed her eyes. This is His Majesty's request, don't regret it when the time comes. Naturally. Shang Junlin couldn't ask for more. Xinyu let go of her hand and withdrew from the man's arms. Let's talk about this at night. Shang Junlin's goal has been achieved, so he didn't mind waiting for a while. He walked to the soft couch and sat down, then said, do you know how much surprise those kings gave me? Is His Majesty talking about the supplies they sent to Subei? Xinyu followed and sat on the other side. Yes, it really opened my eyes. They said that the things in their hands are more abundant than the national treasury. It's really not a joke. Shang Junlin knew that these vassal kings were extremely rich. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given so much gold and silver just to please Xinyu. However, he didn't expect that they had so much more than he had imagined. Not only Shang Junlin, but the other officials who received the news from the supervisory minister also sucked in a breath of cold air. If it weren't for this opportunity, they would probably never have known that the vassal king had so many things in his hands. No wonder the previous kings were so wary of the vassals. Isn't that so? Look at all these, and this is just one fief. Compared to the treasures in the national treasury, this isn't the only fief in the Great Huan dynasty. At that time, His Majesty said that the vassals should also contribute. Who was against it? They even said that the vassal kings were also in a difficult situation, so we shouldn't force them. Is this their difficulty? Have too much money to spend. The Minister of Revenue couldn't help but raise his voice. After working together for so many years, all the officials knew the temper of the Minister of Revenue, so they were not surprised. Don't be in such a hurry to get angry. The Minister of Works patted the Minister of Revenue's shoulder and reminded him, isn't this just the first batch of supplies? Subei needs more than this. You're right. If I had known that they had enough money in supplies, I would have asked for more. Fortunately, it's not too late. His Majesty's method of collecting and sending out batches is really good. When the others heard this, the corners of their mouths silently twitched, and they silently mourned for the vassals who were targeted by the Minister of Revenue. The Minister of Revenue sorted out the list and hurriedly prepared for the next stage of the collection of supplies. This time, he felt that if he didn't make the vassals bleed for the next batch, he wouldn't be the Minister of Revenue anymore. The vassals didn't know that the things in their hands were already targeted by the Minister of Revenue. Your Highness, with so many things, do we really have to send them to Subei? The steward of the prince's mansion was at a loss. If we don't let them, the vassals were also very helpless. The court and the people of the world are watching. The people have already contributed. If we don't do anything, do you think His Majesty doesn't have enough and thinks we're an eyesore? Did the vassals want to take out these things? Of course not. Who would complain about having too much money? But their way out had already been blocked. If they didn't give it, wouldn't it be announcing to the world that they were disloyal to the Great Huan dynasty? They were just deterred by Shang Junlin at the beginning of the year, and now they didn't want to face him at all. The people this prince left in the capital have contacted His Majesty. His Majesty said that if we perform well this time and His Majesty is happy, not only will the past be forgotten, but we will also be rewarded by the court. This prince doesn't want anything, as long as His Majesty doesn't look at this prince. He was very clear that anyone who was targeted by Shang Junlin wouldn't have a good ending. Look at Prince Li, how glorious was he at the beginning, but now he was removed from the imperial family. Then look at Prince Yu, who was still trapped in the capital. He didn't want anything in this life, he just wanted to live the rest of his life in peace. There were many vassals who had the same idea. They had seen Shang Junlin's cruel side with their own eyes and knew how ruthless he was. Those who could live peacefully until now weren't stupid. They couldn't fight against Shang Junlin before, let alone the current full-fledged emperor. However, it was still necessary to feel the pain. Prince Yu's fief. Because Prince Yu himself wasn't there, the officials sent by the court worked together with the officials of Prince Yu's fief to raise the money. Shang Junlin had sent people in advance to find out how much the Prince Yu's fief could contribute. The officials sent by the court knew clearly how much the Prince Yu's fief could contribute. The final decision wouldn't exceed the capacity of the fief, and it would also make the Prince Yu's accumulated wealth bleed. Prince Yu was still in the capital, and the situation was unknown. The officials of his fief naturally didn't dare to play any tricks, so the whole process was very smooth. If Prince Yu knows this news, I don't know how angry he will be. After listening to Shang Junlin, Shen Yu couldn't help but laugh. I will let someone tell him. Shang Junlin's tone had a trace of disgust. Shen Yu found that Shang Junlin now showed more and more emotions in front of him. When he first entered the palace, he almost felt that Shang Junlin was an angry monarch. I don't know what those people are worried about. It's been so long, but they still haven't made a move. Do they really think that Your Majesty won't do anything to Prince Yu? That was why they were fearless and let Prince Yu stay in the secret prison. Maybe it's because they can't even take care of themselves. Yu, do you still remember those people who spread rumors? The Supreme Court got a lot of useful information from them and destroyed several of their strongholds in the capital. Didn't you say that those people couldn't get anything out of them? At first, they didn't know much. Later, they caught a small leader of a force in a tea house. Although this person's status wasn't high, he knew a lot. After being treated by the Supreme Court, he told them all the information he knew. The Supreme Court had caught so many people, but they still didn't get anything. The officials of the Supreme Court were also anxious. It wasn't easy to catch someone who knew something. They used all the means they could to get more information out of him. Hard work paid off. They really did get a lot of useful information. Although they hadn't caught the mastermind behind the scenes, that day wasn't far away. The Minister of Revenue acted quickly. In less than half a day, he drew up a new donation plan. He didn't delay and directly asked to see the Emperor. Shang Junlin wasn't very happy that his two-person world with Shen Yu was interrupted. Shen Yu just happened to want to see what the Minister of Revenue was going to do, so he proposed to go together. Imperial Study. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. The Minister of Revenue respectfully saluted the two. After the donation, the Minister of Revenue's view of Shen Yu changed greatly. When he saw Shen Yu this time, the excitement in his eyes couldn't be ignored. This is the next step of the plan. Your Majesty, please take a look. The Minister of Revenue presented the memorial. Eunuch Meng took the memorial and put it on the Emperor's desk. Shang Junlin opened it and looked at it with Shen Yu. The contents of this memorial were all against the vassal kings. Shen Yu, who was used to cheating the vassal kings, silently lit a candle for the vassal kings who were about to be ruthlessly exploited by the Minister of Revenue. This was simply stepping on the bottom line to ask for things from the vassal kings. The vassal kings couldn't afford it. Too ruthless. Your Majesty, as the vassal kings, since they enjoy the treatment of the Great Huan royal family, they should do their best for the Great Huan royal family. What's more, they are His Majesty's relatives. It's normal for them to solve problems for His Majesty. The Minister of Revenue talked a lot. The central idea was nothing more than that the vassal kings should contribute money and effort. Otherwise, they would be sorry for the people and the great Huan royal family. For the first time, Shen Yu knew that the Minister of Revenue was so eloquent. Shang Junlin's knuckles knocked on the table. His voice was as calm as ever. Take it out for discussion in the court tomorrow. This was passed. The Minister of Revenue was overjoyed. Then, he looked at Shen Yu with expectant eyes. Does Your Majesty have anything else to add? Darren's method is perfect. Under such a gaze, Shen Yu felt a little pressure and couldn't help but pull Shang Junlin's sleeve. Shang Junlin chuckled and helped Shen Yu out. Well, you go prepare for this matter. Discuss it with the Prime Minister first. The Minister of Revenue slightly withdrew his gaze. Your Majesty. After the Minister of Revenue left the palace, he went straight to the Prime Minister's residence. The Prime Minister and Jiang Huaiqing were drinking tea in the courtyard. When they heard that the Minister of Revenue came to visit, they asked the housekeeper to bring him directly. Jiang Huaiqing poured a cup of tea and handed it to the Minister of Revenue. Darren, please. The Minister of Revenue was indeed thirsty. He took the cup and drank it in one gulp, saying, I just went to the palace to see His Majesty. His Majesty asked me to take it out at the morning court tomorrow. It was drafted so quickly. The Prime Minister was shocked by Fong Darren's speed. I had some ideas before. Today, I just put in the specific amount. It's not troublesome. The Minister of Revenue roughly explained his idea. That's it. Even though he knew that the Minister of Revenue's performance was amazing, the Prime Minister still twitched his mouth after hearing it. His Majesty agreed to this method. The Minister of Revenue nodded. I originally wanted to ask if Your Majesty had anything to add. Unfortunately, Your Majesty didn't say anything. The Prime Minister understood. If he added a little more, maybe the vassal kings would directly rebel. The Minister of Revenue was really amazing. Your Majesty, if we let the Minister of Revenue do this, will there really be no problems? Shen Yu sat next to Shang Junlin and rested his chin on one hand. Shang Junlin was reviewing the memorials. When he heard this, his hand paused slightly. He knows what he's doing. That's right. If he doesn't know what he's doing, how can he be in this position for so long? I'm worrying for nothing. Shen Yu yawned. I'll go wash up first. Shang Junlin continued to review the memorials, but he was a little absent-minded. After waiting for a while, he didn't see Shen Yu return. He put down his brush and walked towards the bedchamber. Mu Shi was waiting outside. When he saw Shang Junlin, he was about to salute but was stopped by Shang Junlin. No need. Is Your Majesty inside? Yes. After receiving an affirmative answer, Shang Junlin pushed open the door. Dense hot air hit his face. Your Majesty, are you here to receive your punishment? A young man wearing only red underwear walked barefoot. His half-wet hair scattered in front of his chest and behind his back. He was as beautiful as a demon. Chapter 122. Shang Junlin's eyes instantly lit up. He walked in, quietly locked the door, and walked towards Shen Yu. The young man who had just taken a bath was simply wearing clothes, revealing a large part of his snow-white skin. Under the contrast of his red clothes, it was dazzlingly white. The water droplets on his hair fell and soaked his clothes, leaving a wet mark. Under the candlelight, the young man's temperament was like a demon, and his lazy appearance was even more seductive. His lover looked like this, but he could only look but not touch. It was indeed a sweet punishment. In order to avoid scaring people, Shang Junlin restrained the burning emotions in his eyes and approached the young man step by step. How does you plan to punish me? After getting closer, Shang Junlin subconsciously reached out and wanted to pull the young man into his arms. Shin Yu reached out a hand and pressed Shang Junlin's chest. Shang Junlin stopped and looked at Shin Yu in confusion. You? His eyes were burning hot, and they slid over Shin Yu's skin inch by inch. It was as if there was a pair of invisible hands caressing down along with his gaze. Shin Yu's body gradually turned red. Since it's a punishment, Your Majesty, of course you have to listen to me. Shin Yu felt that his throat was a little hoarse, so he cleared it. Okay, I'll listen to you. His words were polite, but his eyes were still unbridled. The first thing Your Majesty needs to do, Shin Yu glanced at the arm on his waist, let go of me and take a step back. Shang Junlin did as he was told, and a trace of regret flashed in his eyes. Shin Yu was satisfied with his obedience, so he turned and walked towards the inner room. Your Majesty, follow me. Hearing the footsteps behind him, Shin Yu was in a good mood and raised the corner of his mouth. After entering the inner room, the heat became more obvious. Shang Junlin looked around and found the source of the heat behind the screen. It was a huge bathtub. Dense steam was rising from the bathtub, spreading in all directions in midair, filling the entire space. Shin Yu didn't stop and walked straight to the bathtub. When he was almost there, he turned his head and invited, Your Majesty, do you want to join us? Shang Junlin's red robe slid down his shoulder, and his gaze fell on it, unable to move away for a long time. His Adam's apple bobbed violently as he walked over and said in a low and hoarse voice, I will serve you as she bathes. The red color slid off completely. Before Shin Yu could react, Shang Junlin carried her by the waist and gently put her into the water. Shin Yu looked up at Shang Junlin. The man's eyes were filled with uncontrollable emotions. He could only see himself in those long and narrow eyes, and he could only see himself. Shin Yu stretched out her fair arm from the water and hooked it around the man's neck. She gently exhaled, Your Majesty, do you like it? I like it. Shang Junlin patted the young man's back. His sleeves sank into the water, becoming the only trace of black in the water. Muscles of ice and bones of snow. Shang Junlin had always known that Shin Yu was very beautiful, but at this moment, the young man was so beautiful that he couldn't move his eyes away. Other than the young man, his eyes and heart couldn't put anything else. He wanted to leave his mark on the young man's snow-like skin. He wanted the red plum blossoms to slowly bloom on the snow. He wanted the young man to be stained with his traces from the inside out. He wanted to completely possess the young man in front of him. You. Shang Junlin's voice became even hoarser, with an unresolvable desire. He closed his eyes, not wanting to frighten the young man with the emotions in his eyes. With the man's hand supporting her from behind, Shin Yu let go of one hand and slid it down along the man's lapel, finally stopping at the waist belt. Your Majesty, my clothes are wet. Shin Yu raised her head, revealing the beautiful lines of her neck. Shang Junlin was still wearing the imperial robe, and his hair was meticulously tied behind his head. On the other hand, Shin Yu's black hair was loose, and water droplets slid down her shoulders and into the water. Shin Yu's fingers moved slightly, and the waist belt was untied. Didn't Your Majesty say that you want to serve me? Under the steam, the snow was dyed pink. Her entire body, except for her lips, were red like ripe fruits that were tempting to be picked. Shang Junlin's Adam's apple bobbed, and his eyes became darker and darker. He could clearly feel the changes in his body caused by the young man's movements. He allowed the fire in his heart to spread. The raging fire set the prairie ablaze, burning everything. I will definitely satisfy you. Shang Junlin raised his other hand unhurriedly. The outer robe fell, followed by the inner robe. Throughout the whole process, his eyes were fixed on Shin Yu, as if he wanted to ignite the fire on the young man. Shin Yu did not avoid his gaze. She half leaned on the edge of the bathtub and calmly watched Shang Junlin's performance. Shin Yu slightly moved her eyes away when the last cover was no longer effective. The water's surface rippled, and before Shin Yu could react, the man had already sat in the bathtub. The water's surface rippled even more, and Shin Yu fluttered and fell into the man's arms. Shang Junlin was a man of his words. He carefully washed every inch of the bathtub, not missing a single spot. Shin Yu gasped for breath, and slightly tightened her grip on the edge of the bathtub. "I didn't ask you to bathe like this." The warm water flowed in through the gap, and Shin Yu's fingers suddenly tightened. The white snow was dyed with a layer of more gorgeous color than before. Red plum blossoms bloomed on the snow, and as the water rippled, it was a beautiful sight. "Didn't you ask me to help you bathe?" However, under the man's restraint, he could only be forced to stretch out. Tears seeped out of the corners of his eyes, but they were quickly kissed away by the man. I love you." Shang Junlin kissed Shin Yu's ear. His low and deep voice entered Shin Yu's ears. It was extremely gentle, but his actions were firm and irresistible. The storm swept over, and Shin Yu was caught in the center of the storm. Ups and downs. At dawn, the young man's sobbing voice sounded from the tent. "I'm sleepy." A snow-white wrist stretched out of the red tent. Not long after, it was held by another hand and brought back. "Sleep if you're sleepy." The man's voice was full of satisfaction. Shin Yu didn't know when he fell asleep. When he woke up, it was already noon. He moved his body and instantly gasped. There was no place that wasn't screaming in pain. Shin Yu slumped back on the bed. The bed curtain was opened, and a man wearing an emperor's robe came in with a bowl of hot porridge. You're awake." Shin Yu turned his face away. He didn't want to look at the culprit who made him feel uncomfortable everywhere. Shang Junlin, who was full, didn't mind Shin Yu throwing a tantrum. He put the porridge on the table. Are you hungry?" "No." Shin Yu suddenly closed his mouth. It was hard to imagine that such a hoarse voice came from him. Shang Junlin sat on the bed and carried Shin Yu out. "Drink some water first." The water that was fed to his mouth had a sweet taste. Shin Yu's throat was uncomfortable, and he was thirsty. He drank a cup of water from Shang Junlin's hand. After that, he felt his throat was better. "Your Majesty, you didn't look like you were receiving punishment yesterday. Instead, you looked like you were receiving a reward." Shin Yu looked at him angrily. "I didn't restrain myself." Shang Junlin kissed Shin Yu's forehead. But if he could do it again, he wouldn't be able to restrain himself. "Drink some porridge first." Shang Junlin brought the porridge to his mouth and blew on it to cool it down. Then, he fed it to Shin Yu's mouth. Shin Yu didn't want to move a finger. He was exhausted from the whole night and was indeed hungry. He obediently ate a bowl of porridge and finally recovered some strength. Shin Yu was wearing pajamas. As he moved, the collar of his pajamas opened a little, revealing sporadic mottled marks. Shang Junlin lowered his eyes and hid the thick black color in his eyes. These marks were planted by him last night. He also knew that there were many such marks on the young man's body in places that couldn't be seen. Sensing danger, Shin Yu moved to the side. He didn't want to experience what happened last night again. He was still feeling uncomfortable, especially at a certain part of his body. He couldn't get rid of the strange feeling, but it was at that part. He couldn't ignore it even if he wanted to. Shin Yu's hands and feet were weak. Before he could move much, he was caught by Shang Junlin. Shin Yu's face changed slightly. It was the same last night. He wanted to escape several times, but he was caught by Shang Junlin at the last moment. Then, he had to face a new round of violent storms. Every time, Shang Junlin's strength would be stronger than the previous time. No matter how Shin Yu cried or begged, he couldn't stop for a moment. Where does you want to go? Hearing the same words, Shin-yu subconsciously trembled. Chapter 123. Shang Junlin noticed that he seemed to have scared Shin-yu. He coughed softly and hugged the stiff young man. I'm not such a beast. I won't do anything now. Shin-yu looked at him suspiciously. Your Majesty, you promised more than once last night that this would be the last time. After he tricked Shin-yu into believing him, he reverted to his old ways. Shang Junlin rubbed his hair. I really won't do anything. I'm sorry for the torment last night. Then we'll continue next time. Shin-yu glanced at him. Shang Junlin smiled but didn't say anything. Shin-yu was bullied too much last night. The corners of his eyes were still red and his lips were a little swollen. Shang Junlin rubbed his lips and said softly, I'll apply some medicine for you. After last night, Shang Junlin applied medicine for Shin-yu once. When the medicine was applied, the young man who had fallen into a deep sleep groaned softly due to the pain. Shang Junlin almost turned into a wolf again, but his remaining reason stopped him. This was the first time. Shang Junlin couldn't hold back and did it a little too hard. The area was a little red and swollen. He really couldn't bear any more. Shang Junlin sighed and carefully applied the medicine to the patient. The medicine was specially made by the Imperial Institute of Medicine. It was very effective. No need. Shin-yu refused without thinking. He sensed his body. Other than a little strange feeling, everything else was fine. He should have applied the medicine once. His body was very fresh and there was nothing that shouldn't be in his body. He remembered that before he fell asleep last night, his body was sticky. It was obvious that Shang Junlin had cleaned him up. Shang Junlin didn't force him. The medicine was very effective. He only needed to apply it once in the morning and once in the morning. Shin-yu's body was sore and weak. This time, it was more serious than before. Shang Junlin didn't want to let go of him. He leaned lazily in Shang Junlin's arms with his eyes slightly closed. He let his thoughts wander aimlessly. Your Majesty, don't you need to attend to your business? Seeing that Shang Junlin had no intention of leaving, Shin-yu asked. Shin wants to spend more time with you. Shang Junlin rubbed against Shin-yu's cheek. Shin also wants you to spend more time with Shin. Shang Junlin didn't want to be separated from Shin-yu even for a moment after their intimate contact. If it wasn't for eunuch Meng's dissuasion, he wouldn't even want to go to the morning court. If it wasn't for eunuch Meng's dissuasion, he would have taken Shin-yu with him. Shin-yu also enjoyed the feeling of snuggling up to Shang Junlin. This was the fastest morning court session that the ministers had ever had. His Majesty seemed to have more important things to do. After dealing with the things that had to be dealt with, he hurriedly dismissed the court session. The Minister of Revenue's plan was to be completed in several steps. After they were separated, those requests were nothing to the vassal kings. In the end, when they came together, the dust had already settled, and there was no way to change anything. The Prime Minister took Jiang Huaiqing and the other two back to the Fu. In order to make things more convenient, the three almost treated the Prime Minister's Fu as their second home. The place they stayed the most every day was the Prime Minister's Fu. The Prime Minister knew about Shang Junlin's plan. He also felt that these three people were capable of taking on heavy responsibilities and would be more careful in training them. The Prime Minister was definitely one of the people who wanted the imperial court to welcome new blood as soon as possible. Because Jiang Huaiqing and the others were going to Subei in the future, the Prime Minister intended to let them know more about Subei. During this time, the things they had to deal with were mostly related to Subei. During this time, the imperial court was busy with the matters in Subei. Jiang Huaiqing and the other two didn't have any suspicions. They didn't know that when the matters in Subei were over, they wouldn't continue to return to Hanlin Academy. Instead, they would follow the other officials of the imperial court to Subei and officially start their political career in Dahuan. Subei. Batch after batch of supplies were sent to Subei. They weren't sent to the main city, but to the various small places. The officials sent by the imperial court and the local officials of the small places worked together to deal with the disaster relief matters. It was as if the main city had been excluded. After working with Lord Fong for some time, these young officials from the capital were no longer the same as before. With Lord Fong's guidance, they were now able to independently deal with the disaster relief matters in the small cities. With food, the commoners smiled more often and their spirits were refreshed. Keeping in mind Lord Fong's teachings, the officials didn't let the commoners idle. Instead, they arranged for them to do what they could, allowing those who still had energy to participate in the post-disaster reconstruction. While the rumors were spreading through the capital and other places, a similar situation occurred in Subei. The commoners of the small cities were gathered together and led by officials to work. On the way, the atmosphere could be considered relaxed. 10 days ago, I wouldn't have dared to imagine that we would be able to wait until this day. 10 days ago had been the day that the imperial court had brought the disaster relief supplies over. Me too. We've already finished the last of our food. Milord, it's fine to starve for a while, but my family still has a little one who can't endure hunger. If the imperial court hadn't come in time, my little one might have. The middle-aged man didn't continue, but his companions all knew what he hadn't said. The middle-aged man's wife had passed away while giving birth to his child. He had worked hard to raise his child until he was in his teens, and just when there was hope, a drought had suddenly descended. Me too. All of you should remember that when I was sick, it was you who brought me food. At the time, I was lying in my room thinking, at least give me something to eat. Being a full ghost is better than being a hungry ghost. When I turned around and saw all of you bringing in porridge, I was given a fright. No wonder you had such a big reaction. At the time, I really thought that I was going to die. The gods heard my prayers and fulfilled my wish before I died. Gods. Someone suddenly sneered. If there really is a god, why hasn't he cared about our lives for so long? If you ask me, no god is more reliable than the imperial court. The food we're eating now is imported from all over the Great Huan dynasty. It has nothing to do with the gods. That's true. Didn't someone come to us and ask us to believe in some god? At the time, I already felt that it was unreliable. It's not that it's unreliable. When something happens, they run faster than anyone else. They didn't know that their conversation had been overheard by the soldiers nearby. Soon, it would spread to the imperial court. Through this method, the imperial court could better understand the situation in Subei. They were chatting happily when someone suddenly asked in a low voice, "Why do we still have to work for the government? Shouldn't they be doing these things?" The group suddenly fell silent. Then, someone retorted, "How is it working for the government? Aren't we working for ourselves?" That's right. We're going to live here in the future. Besides, the government has already paid us. But aren't those things given to us by the imperial court? Why do we have to work for them before they're paid? The person continued. I say, do you not understand life? The men of Subei were forthright, but they weren't stupid. Some officials had already explained to them why the imperial court had to do this. They also felt that it was better to get paid through their own labor than to eat for free. What's more, they could still receive food every day. Their pay was separated and could be saved up for later use. Although they didn't have to worry about food and water with the imperial court's people here, once they left, wouldn't they still have to rely on themselves? It was a good thing for them to restore Subei as soon as possible. That's not right. You're sneaky and you're still saying such things. Are you up to no good? Someone saw that something was wrong and ran to the side of the accompanying official, saying, "Darren, a suspicious person was found over there." That person didn't have time to do anything before he was caught red-handed. Similar things happened in other places in Sioux Bay. Except for a few people who were fanned, most of them were caught before they could do anything. Shen Yu was tired and couldn't sleep, so he lay on Shang Junlin's lap and let Shang Junlin read him the memorial. Darren Fong must have made preparations in advance. Sioux Bay has been dry for so many days, and the imperial court went there late. It's quite easy for someone to do something, Shen Yu said. Every time Fong Jun went to a place, he would gather the local people and say something to them, explaining the reason for their follow-up actions. After he left, the officials who followed him learned from him and did the same thing. In this way, it won't be so easy to fan the people. Shang Junlin held the memorial in one hand and stroked Shen Yu's hair with the other. When the people that Darren Fong brought back come back, we can investigate whether they can continue to be used. Shen Yu pondered. Although Shang Junlin wanted to suppress the aristocratic families, he didn't completely forbid their existence. The most important thing for a ruler was balance. Whether it was aristocratic families or poor families, it was best to have equal power. I will pay attention to their follow-up performance. Shang Junlin nodded. But people always change. This moment of enlightenment didn't mean eternity. Especially in the officialdom, it was easy to change a person. Shang Junlin didn't need every official to be a saint. That was unrealistic. As long as they could be used by him and bring tangible benefits to the Great Huan dynasty, he could turn a blind eye. With the help of the entire country, the situation in Sioux Bay improved day by day. Although the drought hadn't been relieved yet, the epidemic that the imperial court had been worried about didn't happen. After the natural disaster, the most frightening thing was the epidemic that followed. The imperial court sent a large number of doctors, led by imperial physician Wu, to guard against the epidemic every day. Finally, there was no problem that worried them. Shen Yu thought about it carefully and confirmed that there was only a drought in Sioux Bay in his previous life, and there was no large-scale epidemic. He was slightly relieved. The epidemic that left the deepest impression on him happened a few years later. It was also after that Shang Junlin's reputation took a turn for the worse. There was still a lot of time until now, and the epidemic wasn't completely caused by the natural disaster. If the problem of Fei Meng could be solved in advance, the nightmarish scene in his previous life might not appear again. Young master, the flower sent by Prince An has bloomed. Mu Shi came in with a bowl of boiled medicine. After last night, although Shang Junlin had checked carefully, he was still worried. He asked Imperial Physician Gu to come to Yuzhang Palace to take Shen Yu's pulse. After taking his pulse, Imperial Physician Gu left a new prescription that was mainly used to nourish the body. Shen Yu frowned slightly when he saw the medicine. Shang Junlin found it funny. He put down the booklet in his hand and took the medicine from Mu Shi. When did the flower bloom? When Prince An sent the flower, it was just a bud. After so many days, there was no sign of it blooming. Why did it suddenly bloom? Shen Yu was also very curious about this question. Around 9:00 last night, Mu Shi replied. Shen Yu didn't know why his heart skipped a beat. This time just happened to be when he and Shang Junlin. Why did the flower bloom at this time? Was it a coincidence?